Chapter 999. The restaurant's upgrade was carried out silently. From the outside, there was almost no change. However, no one knew that there were terrifying cannons hidden in the chimney. The system installed the first type of equipment for the restaurant that could attack attackers. However, the activation condition was still to be activated after the restaurant was attacked. Meg didn't have much of an opinion about that. His power had already reached the 7th tier, but it wasn't convenient for him to use it openly. If anyone dared to attack the restaurant forcefully, these few anti-air missiles would be enough to make them suffer. Of course, Meg was looking forward to the restaurant's next upgrade. That was because the system said that when the restaurant reached level 8, it would unlock the rights to the Sky Garden restaurant. Although there wasn't any detailed description, just the words Sky Garden were attractive enough. As for that chance to upgrade, Meg planned to keep it for a while longer. He didn't plan to use it for the time being. Chaos School, Principal's Office. A teacher from the administration office looked at Novin, who was sitting behind the desk, and hesitantly said, "Principal, the new school buildings have been built according to the requirements. We have also started to recruit new teachers. However, some teachers have different ideas about the allocation of the new school buildings. They think that the new children and teachers should start to familiarize themselves with the school from the old school buildings. The money for the new school buildings was provided by Teacher Luna's foundation, and this foundation was set up to give those children who didn't have the chance to go to school a chance to sit in the classroom. Who do you think should sit in the new school buildings for lessons?" Novin asked that teacher with a gaze as sharp as a knife. That teacher perked up, and quickly said, "It should be those children." Novin continued, "Since the school buildings have been built, the recruitment of teachers should be carried out as soon as possible. However, the vetting mechanism and process must be strictly controlled. I will still be the chief examiner for the final interview. We must find responsible teachers for the children." "All right." That teacher quickly nodded again. "Also, your administration office is responsible for connecting with Teacher Luna's foundation. You must do a good job in assisting Teacher Luna to count the number of children and their needs. Your mission is to ensure that every child can come to Chaos School." "Yes." That teacher nodded and left the principal's office. Novin shook his head as he took out a teacher's name list from the bookshelf behind him and flipped through it. These old fellows aren't studying knowledge properly. Instead, they are studying the old and new school buildings. In the City Lord's castle, Luna took out a folded registration form, and handed it to Vivian with a smile as she said, "Vivian, Chaos School's new round of teacher recruitment has already begun. I've brought you a registration form. Hurry up and fill it out, and then hand it over to the registration point. Who knows, you might be able to become a school teacher this year." "Really?" Vivian's eyes lit up. She took the registration form and looked at it carefully for a while. Then she hugged Luna and said with a smile, "That's great. Luna, I'm also a teacher of Chaos School from now on." Luna poked Vivian's head, and helplessly smiled as she said, "Don't. This is just a registration form, not a letter of admission. You have to pass the test, and then pass the interview personally conducted by Principal Novin. Only then can you become a real teacher. It's all right. With my abilities, passing the test will not be a problem for me. Furthermore, Principal Novin treats me very well, so passing the interview will not be a problem for me. Anyway, I'll be a teacher of Chaos School from the moment I get this registration form. There's no running away." Vivian smiled confidently. Then, she looked at Luna curiously, and asked, "But Luna, doesn't Chaos School usually only recruit new teachers at the end of the year when the students are on holiday? Why is it so early this year?" "Because the school's new school building is already completed. As long as we recruit suitable teachers, the children will be able to enter the school early this year to learn some basics. This will be very beneficial for them to integrate into Chaos School. So that's the case. Vivian nodded thoughtfully. Then, she smiled and said, then, the students I'll be teaching in the future will all be the children you've helped. Are you envious? You'd better hurry up and look at the questions. If you can't even pass the written test, then don't even think about becoming a teacher. Luna chuckled. Then, she seriously said, also, although Principal Novan treats you very well, he's very principled when it comes to choosing teachers. If he thinks that you can't teach the children well, then no matter who you are, you'll definitely not pass the interview. You'd better think about whether you're ready to settle down and become a teacher first. Vivian looked at Luna silently for a while. Then, she wiped the smile off her face, and nodded seriously. Ever since my body started to recover, I've been thinking about what I can do. In the end, after thinking about it, I still want to stay with the children. In the past 10 years, I've barely felt any vitality or happiness. However, by being with the children, I might be able to find something from them that I've lost. I think this will be a happy and interesting thing. Very good. You should prepare for the written test. Luna smiled. Then, she took out a stack of test papers from a bag. She blinked and said, these are the real questions from the past years. Normal people can't get their hands on them. Do them all once. If there's anything you don't understand, you can ask me. Hey, although you're doing this for my own good, but, are you treating me as your student? You actually want me to do such a big stack of test papers? I hate you. Vivian looked at Luna with a pained expression. Without today's sacrifice, there won't be tomorrow's flower fragrance. Good luck, you're the fattest. Luna clenched her little fist, and encouraged her. Vivian changed the topic. She looked at Luna with great interest, and asked, speaking of which, the last time Mr. Mack went to Rhoda with you, it was a long journey. Didn't anything romantic happen? Wasn't your grandfather quite satisfied with him? Didn't he express anything to you? There were so many people sitting on flying magic beasts, and we arrived at Rhoda in less than a day. What could have happened? Luna replied with an honest expression. TSK. Why do I feel a little regretful? You're asking for a beating, ha ha ha. I was wrong. Stop scratching me. Ha ha ha, madam, are we really going to execute Plan S this time? That's not a good idea, is it? What's not good about it? In order to come up with this perfect Plan S and win Miss Gloria over, I stayed in the castle for over a month. Now that the plan is complete, it's time to execute it. Under the night sky, a massive bat slowly glided into Chaos City. A black-robed figure was silently following beside her, conversing with her in a soft voice. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, wonderful book mobile version website, .com. Chapter 1000. But Miss Gloria is the young mistress of the family Moreton, after all. She is also a candidate for the successor of the family Moreton. With her family's status in Chaos City, I'm afraid the City Lord's castle and the Grey Temple won't sit back and do nothing if you use force. This is Chaos City, after all. The Black Cat said hesitantly. Force. Ha. I never use force on women. That's just a lousy trick used by useless men. What's the point of getting a person's body? What I want is her heart. Count Bartoli smiled evilly as he landed on the roof of a 3-story building. He looked at the huge manor in the distance, licked his sexy red lips, and smiled as he said, "This Plan S is not for show. I'm already prepared to fail repeatedly in order to get such a beautiful and talented young mistress. You've already used it countless times." The Black Cat murmured. What did you say? A whip appeared in Camilla's hand as she looked at the Black Cat with an unfriendly expression. The Black Cat was shocked, and its fur stood up as it hurriedly said, I said you'll definitely get the beauty. Very good. I think so, too. Camilla nodded with satisfaction before putting away the whip in her hand. The first step will start with a goodnight song. Every woman wants to fall asleep to their lover's song. I'm sure Miss Gloria is the same, Camilla murmured to herself. Camilla softly muttered to herself. With a light tap of her foot, she landed on a roof several dozen meters away and flew toward the manor. Is that really the case? The black cat's voice was a little doubtful, but it still followed behind her quietly. Moreton Manor, in an exquisite little courtyard. Gloria was lying in bed, tossing and turning as she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the scene that happened this evening. As long as two people in love were together, they could overcome all difficulties. This kind of relationship was too sweet and enviable. And for her, in the past 10 years, she had never even dreamed of love because of the mark on her face. That was until Mr. Meg appeared. He used delicious tofu pudding to remove the mark on her face, and told her that she could make more choices and try in life. It was like a ray of light that shone into her heart. She was no longer that timid girl, but he was still the same person. As gentle as jade, polite, knowledgeable, and good at taking off clothes. Oh, my dear lady, have you ever thought of me? Right at this moment, a faint voice suddenly sounded from outside the window. Gloria was shocked. She turned to look at the window, and saw a long-haired figure hanging from the window in a creepy and scary posture. It was even scarier in the dark. Ghost! Gloria screamed. Plop. With a muffled sound, Camilla, who was hanging outside the window, fell down. Ah! Miss Gloria, it's not a ghost. It's me. Camilla stood up with the help of the window. Oh. Just as she was about to poke her head out, the window slammed shut with a bang. Camilla looked at the tightly shut window with a complicated expression. She opened her mouth, but could not say the rest of her words. Madam, let's go. Someone's coming. Black Cat urged. There was a hint of urgency in his voice. Trespassing on a private property was no small matter. Furthermore, his madam's intentions were so impure. If she was discovered, she definitely wouldn't let it go. Camilla looked at the tightly shut window with some resentment. Although she had 10,000 ways to easily break open this wooden window, she chose not to do it in the end. She faintly sighed, turned into a ball of black mist, and disappeared from the small courtyard. Little Black, my entrance was so perfect. My voice was so beautiful and moving. I looked so romantic when I was singing a love song. How could I be mistaken for a ghost? A normal person would react like this if they saw a woman with disheveled hair hanging from a window in the middle of the night, right? Little Black muttered. Repeat what you said just now. The moon is so round today, Gloria, what's wrong? Did something happen? Lance was the first to rush into the courtyard. He asked anxiously outside the courtyard. When he saw Deborah come in, he hurriedly urged, go in and see what's wrong with the child. Child, open the door. Don't be afraid. It's me. Are you all right? Deborah also hurried to the door. She knocked on the door and asked anxiously. Is big sister all right? Mickey also walked over while rubbing his sleepy eyes. He looked in the direction of the room and asked anxiously. After a while, the door creaked open. Deborah hurriedly walked in and closed the door. Mother. Gloria immediately threw herself into Deborah's arms. Her body was still trembling slightly. Don't be afraid. Mother is here. Deborah quickly hugged Gloria. She gently stroked her back and comforted her. When she calmed down a little, she asked gently, Child, what's wrong? Did you have a nightmare? Just now, there was a hanging figure. She she was singing. Gloria pointed in the direction of the window. A hanging figure. Deborah was shocked. She turned to look at the tightly shut window. She didn't see anything. She hugged Gloria tighter and comforted her. You've been too tired recently. That's why you're hallucinating. You'll be fine after a good night's sleep. Gloria frowned. She shook her head and said, it's not a hallucination. But, her singing is really terrible. It's a little scary, but when I think about it, I want to laugh. Mother will sleep with you tonight. Don't worry, she won't appear again. Deborah smiled and let go of Gloria. She walked to the door and opened it. She waved at her husband and son who were standing in the courtyard and said, you two go back to sleep. I'll sleep with Gloria tonight. Is she all right? Lance was still worried. She's fine. I'll tell you tomorrow. Deborah nodded and closed the door again. She held Gloria's hand and returned to the bed. Let's go. We'll go back to sleep too. Lance shuddered and ran out in a hurry. He didn't even put on a jacket. Deborah didn't look like something was wrong. He walked out of the courtyard with Mickey. Madam, the first step of Plan S has failed. Miss Gloria might be traumatized. What should we do next? Black Cat looked at Camilla and asked. The failure this time was purely accidental. But it's okay. One failure is nothing. Plan S is a perfect plan. Naturally, it won't be terminated because of a small failure. Camilla's lips curled into a confident smile. They say that if you want a woman to fall in love with you, you have to grab her stomach. And I am that person for Miss Gloria. What are you going to do? Of course, I'm going to collect the freshest and sweetest blood for Miss Gloria. Chapter 1001. After sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms for the night, Gloria woke up early. The fright from last night was almost gone. She quietly got out of bed, changed her clothes, and prepared to go to Mamie's for breakfast. During this period of time, she was used to waking herself up to a new day with a delicious breakfast, and Mamie's was naturally her only choice. Of course, even she wasn't sure if it was for the food, or to be able to see Mr. Meg every morning. Gloria opened the door and walked out. She was stunned for a moment when she kicked away a bowl that was placed at the door. Blood. He looked over and was instantly shocked. He immediately jumped back into the room. A white jade bowl rolled over not far away. Bright red blood splashed all over the floor, and the thick smell of blood assaulted his senses. Gloria, who had just gotten out of bed, suddenly felt her stomach churn. She covered her mouth and took 2 steps back. Her face was slightly pale as she closed the door. I worked so hard to get this fresh blood. On the roof not far away, Camilla's face was filled with pain and hatred. She asked in confusion, why? Why did Miss Gloria run away when she saw such fresh and sweet blood? And she even kicked the bowl over. This is the fresh breakfast I prepared for her. Madam, breakfast prepared for others is usually placed on the table. Only breakfast prepared for dogs is placed on the floor. Also, although you like fresh blood, humans don't drink fresh blood. In fact, most people hate fresh blood. The Black Cat muttered. Bullshit. Is there anything more delicious than fresh blood in this world? Camilla said coldly. She thought for a moment and said, the problem must be with the blood. It's all your fault for not letting me kill this and not touching that. In the end, I ended up with a bowl of rabbit blood. Yes, yes, yes. You're right, Gloria, what's wrong? Deborah was woken up by the sound of the door closing. She opened her eyes in a daze and saw Gloria standing at the door with a pale face. She quickly got up from the bed and walked to her side, asking with concern. Blood. Someone put a bowl of blood in front of my door. Gloria said in fear. Blood? Deborah was also shocked. She grabbed Gloria's cold hand and comforted her. Then, she gently opened the door and looked outside. There was indeed a pool of blood on the ground outside the door. It hadn't solidified yet and looked quite terrifying. Last night's hanging ghost and this morning's blood. Who the hell is it? Why are they trying to scare Gloria? I have to get justice from Master. Otherwise, Gloria will be scared to death sooner or later. Deborah closed the door, and a smile appeared on her face as she comforted, well, it's okay. It's just a little blood, and it's definitely not human blood. In a while, I'll let your father find your grandfather and let him find out who's playing tricks to scare you. Oh. He'll definitely find out who's playing tricks behind this. Yes. Gloria looked at Deborah and slowly calmed down after a while. She opened the door again and looked inside. The blood was still a little glaring, but after thinking about it carefully, it wasn't that scary. After a while, she opened the door again. Mother, I'm going out. Gloria said to Deborah before stepping over the pool of blood and quickly walking out the door. Her stomach began to churn when she saw the blood. She just wanted to leave the yard as soon as possible. Looks like Miss Gloria really doesn't like blood. I'd like to see what she likes to eat in the morning. Camilla watched as Gloria boarded the carriage. She brought the black cat and followed after her. The carriage left the Moreton Manor and didn't stop until it reached Mama's. Gloria emerged from the horse-drawn carriage and looked at the familiar restaurant. Even though the cold wind was blowing outside, she felt a sense of warmth and reliability for some reason. Her tense emotions were instantly soothed, and she consciously joined the line of 20 to 30 people, waiting for the restaurant to open. Mama's. Why does it sound so familiar? Camilla stood in the distance and frowned as she muttered to herself. Not long after, the restaurant's door opened and Meg pushed his bicycle out of the restaurant. Amy followed closely behind. It's them. Camilla raised her eyebrows immediately. She had a deep impression of Mag and his daughter. She had to admit that the black pepper steak she had tasted that night was the most delicious food she had ever tasted apart from fresh blood. Gloria looked at Meg, who came out of the door, and her gaze gradually softened. Just looking at him made her feel that the grievances and fright she had suffered last night and this morning were nothing. Camilla quickly noticed the change in Gloria's expression and looked at Meg with a cold gaze. So the breakfast Miss Gloria wanted to eat was made by him. It looks like this guy didn't tell me the truth back then. Meg felt an inexplicable chill on his neck and hurriedly put the scarf on his neck. In the face of the cold, his last bit of stubbornness had been abandoned. As usual, he greeted the customers and rode his bicycle to send Amy to school. When Meg returned, the restaurant opened for business. He stood at the door and greeted the customers one by one with a smile. Morning, Mr. Meg. Gloria looked at Meg with a smile. Morning, Miss Gloria. Meg responded with a smile. He looked at her and said with concern, Miss Gloria, you don't look so good. Did you not rest well last night? I had a nightmare, but it's fine. I'll be fine after eating a bowl of Mr. Meg's tofu pudding. Gloria shook her head slightly and a faint blush appeared on her cheeks. Is he showing concern for me? Okay, then let's go in and have a seat. Meg smiled. Miss Gloria is blushing. This guy must have said something to tease her, right? Stinky men, none of them are good. They're all big pig trotters. Camilla's expression became colder and colder. If looks could kill, Meg would have died countless times. After eating a bowl of delicious Yangzhou fried rice and a bowl of sweet and heartwarming tofu pudding, Gloria felt as if she had been completely healed. Her whole body was warm and all the negative emotions were thrown to the back of her mind. Thank you, Mr. Meg. Gloria paid the bill and walked to the kitchen door to thank Meg with a smile. Then, she left with a blush on her face. I want to see what drugs this guy put in his food to make Miss Gloria like it so much. Camilla watched the carriage leave and walked towards Amy's. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, wonderful book mobile version website, .com. Chapter 1002. Countess Bartoli. Meg, who had just opened the door, saw Camilla walking to the entrance of Mamie's and exclaimed in surprise. The black cat servant wrapped in a black robe was still standing behind her. I didn't expect you to still remember me. Camilla smiled coldly. Those who can forget are probably the minority. Meg's gaze swept across her body. Her dark brown wavy hair was casually draped over her shoulders, her green eyes were so charming that they seemed to be able to speak, and her slightly sickly pale face contrasted with her red lips that were as red as blood. She was wearing a tight-fitting black dress, revealing her snow-white and sexy cleavage. The high slit of the dress went all the way to her thighs, and her round and sexy snow-white long legs were a little dazzling. It was indeed unforgettable for a vampire countess who had a queenly aura and a great figure. Is there anything the countess wants? Meg asked calmly. I said that I would visit you, and today I am here to fulfill my promise. Today I will eat you up. Camilla licked her red lips and smiled evilly, as if she was a she-wolf looking at a little lamb. Sorry, I refuse. Meg flipped the wooden sign hanging on the door and took a step back with a smile. The restaurant is already closed, please come again next time. Isn't it just a meal? Why does it sound so erotic coming from her mouth, and even make one faintly look forward to it? Closed. Camilla's eyes showed a trace of confusion, as if she didn't understand Meg's meaning. The restaurant is open until 9:00 in the morning, and it is already 9:00 now, so we are no longer receiving customers. Meg could only explain. Camilla thought for a moment and asked, according to your rules, the one who pays for the meal is the customer, right? You can say that. That's good, if I don't pay today, then I am not a customer. Camilla nodded and walked past Meg, pushing open the door of the restaurant and walking in. It sounds reasonable, but there seems to be something wrong. Meg stared blankly. Isn't this a scoundrel? If it had been an ugly girl, the anti-aircraft missiles would have been aimed at her. But even if the anti-aircraft weapon was aimed at her, it was useless. This vampire countess had the strength of a level 9 vampire. The S-class anti-aircraft missile that could launch a fatal blow on a level 7 target was still somewhat insufficient in front of her. Shirley and the others, who were cleaning up, were surprised to see Camilla walk in. During the break, Meg wouldn't let any guests in. Shirley was even more alarmed. She felt a dangerous aura from Camilla. This sexy woman should be a demon that was even stronger than her. Countess Bartoli, what are you doing? Meg said helplessly as he followed her in. Camilla had already sat down in front of a clean table. She elegantly crossed her legs and looked at Meg. I want the same breakfast as Miss Gloria. If you don't have it, then I can only eat you this morning. So she's here for Miss Gloria. Could it be that she has something to do with Miss Gloria's poor complexion this morning? Meg thought. Camilla had warned him once for Gloria's Chinibu attitude, and this time, she asked for the same breakfast as Gloria. There was probably some connection between them. Countess Bartoli, is she here to cause trouble? Elizabeth looked at Camilla from the corner. This vampire could be considered a legend among women, so she knew something about her. But she didn't expect to meet her here. Meg thought for a while in his heart, but still shook his head, and said in a firm tone, the restaurant's business hours are over. The restaurant no longer provides food. Also, only 300 servings of tofu pudding are sold out this morning. If Countess Bartoli wants to experience the same breakfast as Miss Gloria, please come to the restaurant earlier tomorrow to line up. Is there really nothing else? Camilla stared into Meg's eyes. No. Meg nodded calmly. If this countess really wanted to cause trouble, then he would have to ask Urian for help. In any case, he hadn't used his member's off-site request for help yet, so he had a legitimate reason to do so. No, if I directly make a move, Miss Gloria will definitely find out. Then, my image will definitely become very boorish in her heart. This is very detrimental to my image. Camilla looked at Meg, and also thought silently in her heart, but looking at this face, why do I feel like he needs to be taught a lesson? I really want to tie him up, whip him, and drip wax on him to let him know how powerful I am. Alright, then I'll come again at noon. Camilla stood up, glanced at Elizabeth in the corner, and then looked at Shirley and the rest. Her eyes lit up slightly, and she looked at Meg, saying, "This is your harem?" "They are all waitresses in the restaurant." Meg shrugged. Do you think I'll believe this kind of nonsense?" Camilla curled her lips in disdain, and walked straight to the door. "Sure enough, men are all pigs. None of them are good. I will definitely not let the kind Miss Gloria fall into your trap." Meg, in the restaurant, the girls looked at Meg silently, and their expressions seemed to become a little complicated. Isn't this deliberately destroying the harmonious and friendly atmosphere in our restaurant? Meg wanted to curse, but looking at the pure eyes of the girls, he didn't know how to explain or refute. Harem. What's that? What did that big sister's words mean? Should I tell Amy? Anna was deep in thought, and also a little conflicted. "Madam," from Miss Gloria's expression when she walked out of the restaurant, "the person who has a firm grip on her stomach should be the owner of this restaurant. What should we do now? Should we get rid of him?" Black Cat asked softly. "Isn't he just a pig trotter? I want to put him here, so that Miss Gloria will know who is the one who can really bring her happiness. I don't care about getting rid of a competitor. That would make me look weak. What I want is to crush him directly." Camilla shook her head, and her slightly raised chin was full of pride and confidence. "If we just secretly give him rabbit blood every day, I think we'll be crushed every day." Black Cat muttered. "What did you say?" "I mean, the sun is very round today, nonsense. Has your sun ever been flat?" Chapter 1003. "Sister, do you want to go to the ice cream shop with me today? The children all like you very much," Yabamiya said softly to Elizabeth as they walked, her face full of smiles. "Like me?" Elizabeth frowned slightly. She didn't really like those noisy children because she preferred silence. Yesterday, she only went downstairs to sit for a while in the ice cream shop because she was bored in the dormitory. She casually scattered some snowflakes and didn't even smile at them. "Yes, the children all asked me if you were the real Ice Queen. Beautiful, cold, and able to control ice and snow." Gloria nodded with a hint of pride on her face. "Ice Queen." Elizabeth muttered softly. Thinking of the smiling faces of those children, she revealed a rare smile and nodded slightly. "I'll go back after sitting for a while." Yabamiya nodded with a smile. She held on to Elizabeth's arm and walked forward with a smile. In the ice cream shop, a beast man with sunken eyes looked at Yabamiya and pleaded, "Miss Yabamiya, can I ask for your help? Hold a snowflake birthday party for my child. He was born with snow and has loved snow since he was young. He loves to eat ice cream, but the doctor said he doesn't have many days left. I'm afraid he won't be able to see the first snow of the year. Please, make an ice cream cake for him and let him see snow. Even if it's fake. Mr. Curtis, is little Kyle doing well? You said you would bring him here the last time, but I didn't see you." Is his illness that serious? Yabamiya looked at that beast man with a hint of anxiety and heartache. I'm sorry. A few days ago, someone said that there was an old doctor in the suburbs who might be able to treat Kyle, so I brought him there. It's just that after many days of treatment, Kyle's condition became more and more serious. That doctor asked me to bring him back. He won't be able to hold on for more than a few days. Curtis's face was dejected, his expression filled with grief. Kyle is a good boy. God is not fair to him. Yabamiya looked at Curtis with some pity. Ever since the ice cream shop had opened for business, he would often bring little Kyle to the shop to eat ice cream. However, the seemingly healthy child suddenly collapsed one day and never came to the ice cream shop again. And this man, who could be considered to have a successful career, had become almost unrecognizable because of his child in just a few months. He was the pitiful father and mother. Previously, when little Kyle was critically ill, Curtis had come to the ice cream shop once. However, because he didn't come again, the matter was left unsettled. Yabamiya looked at Elizabeth, who was sitting at the side, with a pleading look in her eyes. She didn't know magic, and she couldn't make snowflakes, but Elizabeth was super powerful, and she could make real snowflakes. If little Kyle could see the snow last night, he would definitely be very happy. She's always so kind. Oh. I really don't know what to do with her. Elizabeth nodded helplessly. Yabamiya's gaze lit up. She looked at Curtis and nodded, saying, then bring little Kyle over tomorrow night. The ice cream shop will be open for business all day tomorrow. However, I still have to ask the boss about this matter. But he's a super nice person, so he probably won't refuse. Thank you, thank you. Curtis bowed to Gloria, wiped his tears, and turned to leave. Let's hope a miracle will happen. Kyle is still so young. Yabamiya looked in the direction of the door and thought to herself. Since eating ice cream cake won't make him better, then why do you still want to eat it? Elizabeth asked, puzzled. I heard that when a person dies, they can go to a carefree place if they don't have any regrets, Yabamiya said with a smile. Go to a carefree place. Elizabeth was deep in thought and didn't say anything else. Boss, a customer came to the shop today and requested to hold a birthday party for his son. Yabamiya told Meg about this at noon. I'm sorry for agreeing to this without your consent. But Kyle is too pitiful. He's only 4.5 years old. Yabamiya looked at Meg. Mia, you're the manager of the ice cream shop. You have the right to make this decision. Besides, even if it were me, I would definitely agree to it. Although I'm running an ice cream shop, I hope that it's warm ice cream and not just ice cubes, Meg said with a smile. He's so pitiful. Why don't we ask Father to make a good meal for him? That way, his illness will be cured, Amy said with pity. Meg thought for a while and said, since the restaurant is closed tomorrow, let's celebrate little Kyle's birthday together tomorrow night. If this is his last birthday, he should be happier if he can receive more blessings from others. Yes, yes. He used to be a very lively child. He would definitely like a lively atmosphere. Yabamiya nodded and looked at Meg, touched. The boss was really a kind person. After lunch, everyone rested for a short while before starting the busy lunch hour. Amy, do you know what a harem is? Anna asked Amy softly as she called her to a corner. Harem? I don't know. Miss Anna, what's that? Is it a palace? Amy shook her head and asked curiously. I don't know. It was the big sister from this morning who said it. Anna shook her head and pointed to Camilla, who just came in, and said, she said that Sister Shirley and the others are all part of Uncle Meg's harem. This must be a very profound word. There might be some huge secret hidden in it. I have to find someone who knows to ask in order to complete the task that Sister Irina entrusted to me. Amy nodded thoughtfully. Gloria didn't come to Amy's at noon. I waited in line for so long for nothing, but I didn't let the person I should see me. How disappointing, Camilla said with some disappointment. Camilla muttered to herself in disappointment. She then pulled out a chair and sat down directly opposite Crassus. Usually, this seat was usually empty. Very few people dared to sit directly opposite a legendary mage, even if he didn't appear to be too scary. Instead, he looked kind. Hey, old man, you look very familiar. Camilla sat down and stared at Crassus for a while before raising her eyebrows. Because I dug up your great-grandfather's grave, kicked your grandfather's butt, and knocked on your father's head, Crassus said calmly. Chapter 1004. In the pugilistic world, the elders would always remind them of some ruthless characters that they should not provoke. The god of fire Crassus and the lord of ice Julian were equally famous, and they were ranked in the top 5 on this list. The first on the list were Alex and Irina. The former could beat anyone, while the latter dared to beat anyone when she was angry. Of course, more importantly, they basically acted together. Of course, Crassus and Julian had a more complicated feeling for the vampires due to some reasons. For example, digging up ancestral graves. The black cat servant hid behind Camilla in a flash. It was so scared that it even dropped its black robe. Its fur stood on end as it hid behind Camilla, trembling. Bullshit, I've already dug up their ancestral graves. Other than a bunch of hanging bats, there's nothing else. Julian curled his lips in disdain. That's because you dug in the wrong direction. Who the hell only knows how to dig up other people's coffins? Of course, there are only dead people in the coffins. The good stuff is on the other side. Crassus's expression was equally disdainful. If it wasn't for that old bat begging me, I wouldn't have bothered to dig up their ancestral graves to help him catch those haunted bats. Later on, you went to cheat for food and drinks. I was just too lazy to expose you. You're the one who cheated for food and drinks. Back then, I helped them to cremate those bats to prevent any future trouble. Moreover, those bats that had turned into spirits had long escaped from the graves. The ones you killed were just insignificant little ones. The real big stuff is on the other side. I was the one who got rid of them. Crassus and Julian went back and forth, and the customers were stunned. Such an explosive rumor could not be heard anywhere else other than Amy's. Is it really okay to discuss digging up their ancestral graves in front of others? Meg, who was in the kitchen, raised his eyebrows, but there was a hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. Looking at the embarrassed Camilla, his mood became inexplicably relaxed and happy. Camilla's feelings were indeed very complicated. As a core member of the vampires, she knew what Crassus and Julian had said. It was indeed something that had happened. Back then, there was a sudden change in the cemetery of the vampire family. There were successive situations where the dried corpses of their ancestors became undead and were reborn. They had lost all their spiritual intelligence, and were only left with brutality and bloodthirstiness. However, they still had 80% of their peak combat power, and they were madly slaughtering their clansmen. The clan's powerhouses were wary of the ancestors' identity, so they invited Julian and Crassus to suppress the corpse tide. Even she wasn't clear about the details. She only knew that the family cemetery had become a forbidden area, and no vampires were allowed to enter. However, in the place where they worshipped their ancestors, she had found some signs of blackening. At first, she thought that it was caused by the incense, but after listening to the conversation between Crassus and Julian today, she couldn't help but suspect that it wasn't caused by the incense, but by Crassus. No matter what, Crassus and Urian were indeed the benefactors of the vampires. Although they had already given them enough compensation back then, and didn't care about the serious damage they had caused to the cemetery during the battle. The vampires were still very grateful. Even so, listening to the two of them continue to boast about how they had kicked the clan leader of the vampires and punched the powerhouses of the vampire clan, Camilla still couldn't maintain her expression. She hesitated for a moment and said, "The two of you, there may be some discrepancies between the past and what you remember. It's better not to talk about it here. Remember wrongly. It's impossible. I won't forget your father even if he turns into ashes." Crassus shook his head, and said with a serious face. Julian also said with a serious face, "Do you still have the hobby of drying dried bats in your family? Let me tell you, you'd better get rid of this bad habit. It's easy to spoil this thing if it's hung for too long. It's better to burn it as soon as possible." Camilla looked like she had nothing left to live for. She was already starting to regret walking into this restaurant and sitting here listening to them talk about this. Of course, what made her feel even more strange was why the legendary god of fire and lord of ice, who were at loggerheads with each other, would appear in the same restaurant and have a meal together peacefully. This was very different from what the legend said. She definitely couldn't beat them in a fight. Even if her father was here, he could only listen. After all, even her grandfather's butt had been kicked before, so it wasn't too embarrassing. Amy walked over with Ugly Duckling in her arms, and said to the two of them seriously, "Master, you're not allowed to shout loudly in the restaurant. Otherwise, you'll affect the other customers eating." Crassus smiled, and said, "All right, my precious disciple has spoken. Then, I won't say any more. Let's order and eat. For Amy's sake, I won't hold it against you." Julian also turned around and smiled at Amy dotingly. "Disciple?" Camilla looked at Amy and was stunned for a moment. Then, she recalled a piece of news she'd heard previously that Crassus and Julian seemed to have taken in a disciple. She didn't pay much attention to it, and at one point, she thought it was just a boring piece of fake news. She just didn't expect the news to be true, and what shocked her even more was that the two of them actually took in the same disciple. Camilla also had a deep impression of Amy. She just didn't expect this rather cute half-elf girl to be taken in as a disciple by both Julian and Crassus at the same time. This was equivalent to having two terrifyingly powerful backers at the same time. Of course, more importantly, Amy was that detestable boss's daughter. In other words, that pig trotter who seduced Miss Gloria had both Crassus and Julian as his backers. Seems like I can't use force. Camilla glanced in the direction of the kitchen with a regretful expression. "Hello, big sister Camilla." Amy greeted Camilla with a smile. She had a very important question in her heart that she wanted to ask her now, but there were so many customers here, and it wasn't very convenient for her to do so she greeted her first and found an opportunity to ask her later. Camilla nodded slightly, and said, "Hello." Although she was full of hostility towards that pig trotter, it was undeniable that Amy did indeed have a temperament that made people want to dote on and like her. Her delicate little face was slightly puffed up, and her big blue eyes were sparkling, making people want to pinch her little face. Ugly Duckling, on the other hand, looked at the black cat a little warily, and made a warning sound with its mouth. Crassus was sitting opposite her. Although he didn't say anything, the invisible pressure still made Camilla a little nervous. She ordered a plate of Yangzhou fried rice and a plate of sweet tofu pudding, and then sat up straight and still, forcibly changing from a wanton countess to a dignified lady from a wealthy family. "Humph. I'll make things difficult for him when I get to eat something disgusting. Then, even if Crassus and Urian are his backers, they won't be able to interfere," Camilla thought to herself as she put down the menu. "Your Yangzhou fried rice." A bowl of fried rice was quickly placed in front of her. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, wonderful book mobile version website, .com. Chapter 1005. This aroma. The aroma of eggs and chopped green onions wafted over, and Camilla's eyes lit up. It was fresh and special. She looked at the fried rice on the plate again. The rice grains were clearly defined, and each grain was perfectly wrapped around the egg. Various ingredients of different colors were cut into the size of the rice, and the color was bright and harmonious. Just looking at it made her want to eat her fill. It was obviously just a plate of fried rice. Normally, she wouldn't even take a bite of this kind of food. But now, it made her feel like she was ready to eat it. Try it. Camilla heard a voice in her heart, full of temptation. Then let me see what that guy put in here to make Miss Gloria like it so much, Camilla thought to herself as she scooped up a spoonful of rice and put it into her mouth. The grain-sized shrimp and ham tasted so delicate, and the egg-wrapped rice was full of sweetness after being chewed. The taste of all the ingredients melted in her mouth and attacked her taste buds. Even after she swallowed, the aroma still filled her mouth. Different from the sweetness and freshness of blood, this fresh taste and taste seemed to have opened a door in her world, allowing her to step into it. This taste, it's amazing. For the first time, Camilla tasted the deliciousness of food other than the bloody meat. The last time she experienced the taste of food, it was also Meg, but it was a medium-rare black pepper steak. Whether it was steak or red wine, they were both food that she could easily accept. But in this plate of fried rice, almost all of them were food that she had never tried before. She even thought she would never try in her life. But they brought her an unparalleled sense of novelty and deliciousness. One mouthful was not enough, so Camilla quickly scooped up another spoonful of fried rice and put it into her mouth. One mouthful after another, it was so delicious that she could not stop. Soon, the bowl of Yangzhou fried rice was empty. I want another bowl of Yangzhou fried rice, Camilla said almost without hesitation. After saying that, she was stunned for a moment. Looking at the empty plate in front of her, there was not even a grain of rice left. She muttered to herself with a strange expression, did he really put some kind of drug in it? How can ordinary ingredients become so delicious that I can't stop eating them? Here's your sweet tofu pudding. The fried rice will be served soon. Before Camilla could think clearly, Yabamiya placed a bowl of tofu pudding in front of her. The sweet tofu pudding was another delicious feast. Half an hour later, Camilla burped as she walked out of Amy's. She leaned against the door frame and rested for a while before turning back to look in the direction of the kitchen. Burp. He must have drugged me. But, it's so fragrant. If it wasn't for the fact that my stomach is full, I would definitely have another bowl. Big Sister Camilla, I have a question for you, Amy said with a smile as she followed Camilla out of the door. Problem. Camilla looked at Amy. Okay. Amy nodded and looked around to make sure no one was looking. Then she leaned forward and whispered, I want to know, what is a harem? Harem. That's the name the king uses for his women. Camilla paused and looked in the direction of the kitchen. But there are also some stinky men who shamelessly call their women his harem. Amy's eyes lit up. She felt like she had heard something incredible. Let's go. Camilla turned and disappeared into a cloud of black mist. If that's the case, then Big Sister Mia and the others are Father's women. Although they're all very beautiful and nice, if Big Sister Irina finds out, Father will definitely be beaten up, right? And if Big Sister Irina gets angry and doesn't want to join Father's harem, then I won't be able to hug her to sleep every day. That would be terrible. Should I tell her about such an important thing? It's really annoying. Amy squatted at the entrance of the restaurant and held her little face in her hands as she thought to herself. Madam, have you been captured by the enemy? How can such a small trick capture me? Is the Yangzhou fried rice delicious? It's delicious. Let me tell you, I'm just infiltrating the enemy's territory to spy on them. As the saying goes, only by knowing yourself and your enemy can you win 100 battles. You won't understand this logic. Then what should we do now? The facts have already proven that conquering Miss Gloria's stomach is no longer a viable path. Although I don't know what drug that guy put in the food, I have to admit that he has indeed succeeded in conquering Miss Gloria's stomach. Burp. Including yours, right? She muttered softly. Shut up. Since taking the gentle and warm woman card is a dead end, then we have no other choice. We can only use the ultimate trump card, the domineering CEO card. Domineering CEO. Yes, the only domineering CEO who has ever failed. The black mist gradually dissipated, and Camilla's figure appeared. She looked at the demi-clothing store in the distance with a confident smile on her face and walked over elegantly. Welcome. Camilla had just reached the door when it was pulled open, and an employee said with a smile, "Welcome." Camilla walked in, raised her chin slightly, and said calmly, "How many clothes do you have here?" "I'll take all of them." "Remember, all of them." "This." The employee looked a little troubled, and said in a low voice, "I'm sorry, dear customer, all of the clothes in the store have been reserved, including next month's production. So, there are no clothes in the store for you to buy now." Camilla, who wanted to appear calm, raised her eyebrows and looked at the employee. She couldn't help but raise her voice. "Not a single one." "Yes, not a single one." The employee quickly nodded. This customer's aura was too scary. Even the noble ladies who came usually didn't give her such pressure. Wasn't this deliberately making her fail to show off? Camilla frowned. She thought for a while, and a smile appeared on her face. She said rather domineeringly, "All of the clothes in the store now, including all the clothes you can produce next month, I'll take them all at double the price of whatever price they offer." The employee opened her mouth slightly, and the way she looked at Camilla changed. Double the price of all the clothes in a month's time, that would be millions of copper coins. She said with a trembling voice, "Please wait for a moment. I'll get the boss here. I can't make the decision on this matter." The other employees in the store also heard Camilla's words, and they were all shocked. No pop-up window. Chapter 1006. Camilla was very satisfied with everyone's expression. Since she was called the Countess, she naturally didn't lack money. Her fiancé's early death had no one to inherit his family fortune, so all his assets became hers. Among the vampires, except for a few old farts, she was probably the wealthiest vampire. With money, one could really do whatever they wanted. She glanced at the few clothes in the shop and was surprised to find that these clothes were actually quite beautiful, especially the long clothes. Just by hanging there, they deeply attracted her gaze. She couldn't help but imagine how beautiful she would look in that dress. Double the price. In the office, Gloria, who was checking the accounts, was a little surprised. She put down the bill in her hand and got up to walk out. Countess Bartoli. Gloria was a little surprised to see Camilla standing in front of a black trench coat. She had a deep impression of this vampire countess. Although she felt that some of her actions were a little strange, her status in the vampires was indeed very high. Although she was surprised that Camilla wanted to buy all the clothes, Gloria's expression quickly returned to normal. She walked up with a smile and said, "Nice to meet you, Countess." "Nice to meet you, Miss Gloria." Camilla turned around and looked at Gloria with a smile. "You're still as beautiful today." Gloria was a little surprised. She also smiled and said, "You're still as beautiful as ever, Countess." "Is that so? I thought I was getting more and more haggard because I missed you." Camilla sighed with a bit of bitterness in her voice. Gloria was taken aback. She looked at Camilla's strange expression, and hurriedly said, "I heard from the shop assistant that you want to buy all of the clothes in the store and all of the clothes that will be produced next month." "Yes." Camilla nodded slightly. She looked into Gloria's eyes and said affectionately, "I want all the clothes made by Miss Gloria, no matter how many there are." Gloria felt a little uncomfortable being stared at by Camilla. She shook her head and said, "I'm sorry, Countess. These clothes have all been reserved. I'll pay double." Camilla's tone was firm. "I'm sorry, Madam Countess. Suede values integrity. The clothes that have been ordered will definitely be delivered to the customers. It won't change even if other customers increase the price," Gloria said firmly. Camilla's brows furrowed slightly as she looked at Gloria's resolute eyes. The plot didn't seem to be developing according to her expectations. At a time like this, shouldn't Miss Gloria be looking at her affectionately and offering her all the clothes along with her heart happily? "Miss Gloria, please don't misunderstand. What I value is your unique and exquisite designs. These clothes are the most beautiful clothes I've ever seen. There are no fancy gems or cumbersome accessories, but they easily attracted my attention. I even fell in love with them." Camilla pointed at the trench coat on the side and looked at Gloria lovingly. "I was just thinking who designed such beautiful clothes. It must be someone with many talents. I even think that I might have already fallen in love with her." Gloria's face suddenly showed some nervousness. Even her voice was a little stuttering. Could it be that you also like Mr. Meg?" "Yes, I do." Camilla took the clothes naturally. Then she suddenly stopped and looked at Gloria with wide eyes. "Huh? Who did you say?" "Mr. Meg. Didn't you design these clothes?" "I didn't design these clothes." Gloria shook her head and looked at Camilla with more caution. Could it be that the Countess also liked Mr. Meg? Then what was she doing here today? Was she here to show off? However, Mr. Meg was so outstanding. It was inevitable that someone would like him. Thinking of this, she couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. It was as if her precious things were suddenly discovered by someone else. Fuck. Why is that guy everywhere? And, also. This also seems to have a deeper meaning. Camilla's heart was in a mess. She choked on the lines she had thought of. She couldn't continue. Her heart was stuffed. Not only did he grab hold of Miss Gloria's stomach, but that fellow even dared to touch her clothes, which was the most important thing to a woman. Furthermore, he did it so well. He didn't even give her a way out. This was intolerable. "If Countess Bartoli likes this dress, you can order it in the shop. But according to the order, you will have to wait until at least next month to get it," Gloria said cautiously. Although Countess Bartoli was famous, this was Chaos City after all. Furthermore, she was a candidate to inherit family Moreton. Even she couldn't do anything to her, so she wasn't worried. "Then I'll order it," Camilla said with mixed feelings. Originally, she had wanted to show off her domineering queen aura. In the end, she had kicked an iron plate. Now, even if she wanted to cry, she couldn't. She just wanted to find a quiet place to calm down, so that she wouldn't be unable to resist the urge to go back and kill that despicable fellow. "Help Countess Bartoli register," Gloria said to the shop assistant at the side. As soon as she said that, Camilla regretted it. She thought to herself, no way. This dress was designed by that guy. If I buy it, won't it mean that I approve of him? Then I will have to lower my head in front of Miss Gloria. This can't happen. "Countess Bartoli, what color do you want?" the shop assistant asked with a smile. "Black. This is the style. It's so nice." 10 minutes later, Camilla walked out of the suede with a complicated expression. She was holding a stack of invoices in her hand. He grabbed a woman's stomach and then grabbed a woman's clothes. That guy is definitely a strong opponent, Camilla mumbled to herself as she put away the invoices in her hand. Miss Gloria's eyes have been blinded. She has fallen into that guy's trap and can't get out. Since that's the case, there's no other way. I can only let him show his true form and let Miss Gloria see it with her own eyes. Only then can she wake up and know who she can entrust her life to. Madam, what do you plan to do next? Plan C. I can only sacrifice myself and let that beast show his true form. Camilla's expression gradually became seductive. Her pink tongue slid across her sexy red lips. No man in this world can resist my temptation. You won't put yourself in a trap, right? Shut up. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, wonderful book mobile version website, .com. Chapter 1007. Under the boundless sea realm, the ancient temple was entangled by seaweed, and one could still see the grandeur of the past. High Priest, Saint Iskana has already stepped onto the teleportation portal to find the Chosen One. However, that teleportation portal has been around for thousands of years. It is still unknown if it can send her to that place, a siren said respectfully to the black-robed siren sitting on the altar. That is an ancient altar left behind from ancient times. It has been around for tens of thousands of years. As long as it is not damaged, it can activate teleportation, and teleport between various teleportation portals. What Gunna has with her are all the energy stones that we have in Lantish that can activate teleportation portals. It is enough for her to activate the teleportation portal 3 times. If she still can't find the Chosen One after 3 teleportations, then she can only walk. The High Priest's voice also had a tinge of worry. You have deduced that the location of the Chosen One is near an ancient altar. I believe that the omnipotent God will be able to protect Ghana and help her find him. I hope so. In a desolate desert valley, an ancient teleportation portal lit up. A beautiful figure appeared in the center of the altar. 2 white shells barely covered her breasts. She was wearing a seaweed skirt, and her long legs were pressed together. Her snow-white skin was like snow, and her golden red hair was still wet. She looked like a beauty who had just come out of the bath. Where is this? Is this the continent? That woman opened her eyes, and a glint flashed across her pale golden eyes. She looked around curiously. The golden sand was emitting dense heat. Everything was so novel. Then, she looked up at the sun in the sky. The golden red disk was hanging in the sky like a burning fireball. Is this the legendary sun? So round, so bright, so glaring. She retracted her gaze, and felt that her surroundings had turned black. Am I blind? No. Ghana blinked her eyes in a panic. She reached out and groped around. Luckily, her vision gradually recovered after a while. She then heaved a sigh of relief. She covered her face and revealed a small gap between her fingers. She looked at the sun secretly, and mumbled with lingering fear, so Grandma didn't lie. You will really go blind when you see the sun. This sun is so stingy. I can't even look at it. Oh, yes. I am here to find the Chosen One. The High Priest said that I must find him, knock him out, and bring him back. Just thinking about it is so exciting. Ghana's eyes turned as she remembered the purpose of her trip. She looked around, and didn't see the scene of buildings in the image. Her gaze landed on a tall sand dune beside the valley. I want to go up there and take a look. Gina came to the side of the altar. She extended a foot and stepped into the sand. Hiss. It's so hot, oh. Ghana retracted her snow-white foot the moment it touched the sand. She lifted her foot with difficulty, and the sole of her foot was red. She rubbed her foot with tears in her eyes, and blew on it. She mumbled, "Why is it so hot? My little foot is cooked. Do the people on the continent live like grilled fish every day? So pitiful. It is more comfortable to live underwater." Then, why did the high priest try so hard to let Lantis return to the continent? Even though she was complaining, Ghana stood up again after sitting on the altar for a while. However, she didn't try to step on the ground directly this time. Instead, she tore a section of her grass skirt, and made it into something that could barely be called a pair of straw sandals. Ghana put on the straw sandals uncomfortably. Then, she took a deep breath, and stepped into the sand. The dense heat surged up from the ground crazily after leaving the altar. This feeling of being in an oven made Ghana uncomfortable. Luckily, she had the straw sandals under her feet, and the ground wasn't so hot anymore. It was still bearable for the time being. Oh no! I feel like the water in my body is going to be sucked dry. Also, there isn't any water element in this place. I have to return to the altar before I become a dried fish. Ghana took small steps, and waved her arms as she moved forward quickly. The distance between each step was less than 10 centimeters. She looked like a penguin that was trying its best to run. Even though the frequency was very fast, her speed was indeed no different from that of a penguin. Even though she had been training to turn her tail into legs since she was young, and tried to walk, the feeling of stepping on solid ground was completely different from walking in the water. This small step was a big step for a mermaid. Ghana struggled with all her might, and finally climbed to the peak that was 30 meters tall after half an hour. Behind the sand, there is still sand. Do we really have to come back to this godforsaken place? Ghana, who was drenched in sweat, looked at the boundless desert. She couldn't even see a bird, let alone a human or a magical beast. She sat on the ground in disappointment and helplessness. Then, she jumped up again, and patted her butt with her teeth bared. She felt like she was almost burnt. Oh no, I have to return to the teleportation portal to replenish my water. Ghana walked toward the altar weakly. The large amount of dehydration had made her very weak. She finally returned to the teleportation portal after walking for almost half an hour. Oh my god. I want to go home. The continent is too scary. I almost became a dried fish. Ghana lay weakly on the teleportation portal, sobbing as she felt wronged. She took out a big water bag from a space bag and gulped down the water with her head tilted back. She only put the water bag on the ground contentedly after drinking for a full 5 minutes. She heaved a sigh of relief and felt like she had come back to life again. Luckily, the high priest prepared a big bag of seawater for me. Otherwise, I would have died of thirst here. The water in this water bag can fill up a big pool. It should be enough for me to use for a long time. If there is no more water, I can only return to the sea, Ghana mumbled to herself. Gina muttered to herself. She stood up and walked around the transportation portal. Looking at the hot desert outside, she felt a lingering fear. This was definitely not the location in the image. No, I have to find the chosen one as soon as possible. Lantis is still waiting for me. Ghana's gaze became determined as she pressed the teleportation stone in her hand into the groove in the center of the teleportation portal. A golden light lit up, and Ghana disappeared from the teleportation portal, leaving behind a water bag. Ayayaya! My water! A scream rang out in another space. Chapter 1008. It was another rare day off. Early in the morning, Amy sat up on the bed and stretched her arms. She rubbed her sleepy eyes and climbed onto the big bed. She knelt beside Meg's pillow and wanted to wake him up, but she stopped when she saw Meg sleeping peacefully. Father works so hard every day. Let him sleep in on his day off. Amy retracted her little hand and leaned over to kiss Meg's face gently. Then, she got off the bed quietly and waved at Ugly Duckling, who was still trying to climb onto the bed. She picked it up, opened the door, and walked downstairs. After she went out, she whispered, "Ugly Duckling, don't disturb Father. He works so hard every day." Meow, meow. Ugly Duckling looked at Amy with a confused expression, but its voice became much softer. "Father cooks for me every day. Today, I've decided that I'm going to make a breakfast of love for Father." After going downstairs, Amy put Ugly Duckling down and moved a stool over. Then, she stood on her tiptoes and took off the little apron that was hanging by the door. It was given to her by Aunt Bernice, but she almost never used it. Amy imitated her father and put on the apron. Then, she moved the stool into the kitchen and washed her hands. Then, she ran to the fridge and looked at the various ingredients in it with a troubled expression. "There's so much meat and vegetables. What should I make?" Meow, meow. Ugly Duckling used its paws to pull at the glass fish tank at the side. Its fat face was full of anticipation. "No, Father said that breakfast has to be bland. I can't have fish." Amy shook her head. Meow, meow. Ugly Duckling ran to the other side of the fish tank and cried out while pulling at the prawn compartment. "Prawns are a good choice." Amy nodded. Then, she picked up the small net and stood on the stool to scoop up 2 fat prawns with some effort. Plop. A prawn that refused to accept its fate fell out of the small net and landed on the ground. It tried to jump towards the sewer pipe. Meow. Ugly Duckling went over immediately and raised a paw to press down on the prawn. "Ugly Duckling, good job." Amy walked over and grabbed the prawn that was as big as her palm from Ugly Duckling's paw. "I'll reward you with a prawn head later." Meow, meow, meow. Ugly Duckling cried out excitedly. "Apart from prawns, I want some beans, beef, mushrooms." "Oh, right, how should I turn on the fire?" "Forget it, I'll just make a fireball." "Oh." The fire seemed to be a little too big. Why did the bottom of the pot become a hole? "No, I have to do it again." Amy was fiddling around in the kitchen, making some strange noises from time to time. Meg was woken up by the smell of smoke. "What's that smell?" Meg opened his eyes in a daze and looked at the small bed naturally. He could see Amy sleeping every morning, but she was nowhere to be seen today. There was no one on the bed. "Amy." Meg jumped up from the bed and walked over to the small bed. He felt under the blanket, and it was no longer warm. Obviously, the little fellow had been up for a while. Where did she go? Meg didn't bother to change his clothes. He opened the door and walked out in his pajamas. A burnt and smoky smell hit him in the face, and Meg couldn't help but cough. What is this little fellow doing? Setting the house on fire. Meg was shocked. The smoke and the burnt smell were obviously coming from downstairs. Even if someone told him that there was a fire downstairs, he wouldn't suspect anything. He hurried down the stairs. It still looks a little strange. I wonder if Father likes it. Come, Ugly Duckling, have another taste. Meg had just reached the kitchen door when he heard Amy's words, and he stopped in his tracks. Could it be that Amy is making breakfast for me? A hint of surprise appeared on Meg's face, and he felt a warmth in his heart. The little fellow had gotten up quietly and sneaked downstairs to make breakfast for him. Meg wasn't in a hurry to say anything. Instead, he peeked into the kitchen and saw a strange scene. Amy was holding a long soup ladle in her hand. There was a thick black soup in the ladle, and she was walking slowly toward Ugly Duckling with a smile on her face. Meanwhile, Ugly Duckling retreated step by step until it reached a corner. It looked at the black soup with its big eyes, and it stood up on its two front legs in horror. It covered its face with its hands, and looked as if it had nothing to live for. Ugly Duckling, it's okay. Although the taste is a little strange, this is for my father, after all. At least he won't die after eating it. So, I can only let you test it for poison. Amy smiled as she reached out and pried open one of Ugly Duckling's fat paws. Meow, Ugly Duckling looked at Amy with resentment. Are you the devil? You don't even know if you can eat it, and you're giving it to me. Meg didn't know whether to laugh or cry upon seeing this. He looked at the kitchen again, and a hint of resignation gradually appeared in Meg's smile. Even though it was still quite neat and tidy, the 3 pots that had been burned through the bottom of the pot, and the fireball that was leaping on the stove was simply the kitchen's terminator. Meg couldn't stand watching Amy continue to let Ugly Duckling test for poison. He stood at the door and looked at Amy with a smile, and said, Amy, why are you up so early? Father. Amy was slightly startled. She turned to look at Meg, and hid the soup ladle in her hand behind her back. She was a little dejected as she whispered, because I feel that Father is working too hard, so I wanted to get up and make breakfast for Father. But, so it's Amy making breakfast for Father. No wonder I could smell a nice aroma in my sleep. Let me see what Amy has made. Meg walked into the dining room with a smile, and went straight to the stove. His eyelids twitched as he looked at the pot of dark brown stew that was still bubbling on the stove. This is prawn stew with beans, beef stew, mushroom stew. Amy counted all the ingredients on her fingers, and listed almost all the ingredients in the fridge. Then, she looked at Meg with anticipation in her eyes, and asked, Father, do you like them? Meg looked at Amy's big blue eyes. She clearly wasn't interested in cooking, but she had put in so much effort to make him breakfast. Although the aroma was a little strange, he was very touched by her thoughtfulness. He patted her head with a smile, and said, Father likes them. Thank you, Amy. Chapter 1009. Amy's eyes lit up immediately, and she said with a smile, Since Father likes it, you'll definitely finish it all, right? This. Meg was taken aback. He looked at the black pot of stew in front of him, and his heart was about to break down. However, he still put on a smile, and nodded as he said, Amy made it, so of course I'll finish it. Meow. Ugly Duckling walked over and rubbed its head against Meg's calf. It looked at him gratefully as if he had saved it from hell. I think it's about time. Amy, let's put the fire away first. Meg could vaguely smell a charred smell coming from the pot. The smell was already strange, and if it was charred again, Meg was afraid that he wouldn't be able to eat it even if he pinched his nose. Amy answered obediently, and waved her hand to put away the fireball on the stove. Meg looked at the stove with a hole burned in it, and negotiated with the system in his heart. He settled on a repair price of 5,000 copper coins. This breakfast was really not cheap. After washing up and changing his clothes upstairs, Meg carried a bowl of black soup to the table. A complex smell wafted over from under the table. It was mixed with prawns, beef, shiitake mushrooms, and all sorts of other ingredients. It was hard to imagine that they would all appear in the same pot. Meg looked at Amy, who was standing at the table with an expectant look. He hesitated for a moment, but still picked up the spoon and scooped a spoonful of soup into his mouth. It wasn't unexpectedly delicious. It was sour and sweet with a hint of fishy taste. Ingredients that hadn't been processed properly were mixed together. Even the best ingredients in the world wouldn't be able to make a delicious soup. Father, how is it? Amy asked. It's very delicious. Meg nodded with a smile. He picked up the spoon and scooped another big spoonful into his mouth. That's great. Amy clapped her little hands with a happy expression. After thinking for a moment, she said, "Then I'll go get a bowl too." No. Meg hurriedly reached out to stop her, and said with a smile, "Because it's really too delicious, Father has decided to finish it all by himself. Father will make other delicious food for Amy later." Amy looked at Meg, and thought for a moment before nodding. "All right, since Father likes it, I won't eat it. I'll give it all to Father. I'll make it every day." Meg almost dropped the spoon in his hand. He quickly shook his head, and said, "No, it's so cold in winter. How can Amy wake up every day to make breakfast for Father? Just lie down and sleep in the future. Father will wake up and make breakfast for you." "No, I can't eat this breakfast, I can't have it. I can't have any more." However, Amy's intentions made him feel very warm on this winter morning. After breakfast, Amy looked at Meg, who was washing the dishes in the kitchen, and asked, "Father, aren't we celebrating that orc big brother's birthday today?" "Oh. That's for tonight. Then, what are we going to do during the day?" Amy looked at Meg expectantly. "In the morning." Meg pondered for a while, and his eyes suddenly lit up. He turned to Amy, and said, "Father will bring you to an interesting place later." After putting Ugly Duckling in the bicycle basket, Meg brought Amy to the west of the city on the bicycle. There was a big market in the west of Chaos City, and it was also a gathering place for merchants from all over the world. Merchants from all over the world gathered there, and street performers could be seen everywhere. It was a rest day, and both sides of the market were filled with hawkers setting up stalls. Cece was bustling with tourists, and the market was very lively. Orcs were hawking their beast teeth, demons were performing fire-breathing on the streets, elves were earning applause and rewards with their melodious voices, and succubi's seductive dance with snakes made men stop in their tracks. "Father, look! There are 2 scallions growing out of that big green demon's nose. Wow! What a beautiful bird, and it can even sing. Look at that big snake, it's actually coiled around that big sister." Amy sat on Meg's shoulder, and looked around in amazement. She kept mumbling, and her big blue eyes seemed to be glowing. Meanwhile, Ugly Duckling was lying on Meg's head, curled up into a ball, and shivered. This was also Meg's first time coming to the West City Market. He had overheard the customers talking about it 2 days ago. Apart from being able to buy all kinds of things here, it was also a good place to have fun. Men and women of all ages could find fun here. Meg looked around. Many of the merchants here were not from Chaos City, so he could roughly see the local customs of the Norland continent from them. "Father, I want to eat that candy," Amy said as she pointed at a little boy who was holding a bird-shaped candy not far away. "Is that a candy man?" Meg glanced at the candy in the little boy's hand. He looked around, and saw a small stall at the entrance of an alley. A white-haired old man was handing a little lamb candy to a child with a smile, and walked straight over. The old man looked up at Amy with a smile, and asked, "Little kid, do you want to eat candy?" Amy nodded honestly. The old man smiled, and said, "Then spin this wheel. I'll make you whatever you spin. If it's this blank spot, I'll make you whatever you want for free." Okay. Amy nodded happily. Meg put Amy down with a smile, and let her spin the wheel. In his distant memory, his father seemed to have brought him to the market like this before, and spun the candy man's wheel. "Wow, it's blank. Father, look, I've spun to a blank spot." Amy's surprised voice interrupted Meg's thoughts. Looking at the spot where the arrow on the wheel stopped, a smile appeared on Meg's face. He patted her head, and said, "You're awesome. Little girl, you're so lucky. Tell me, which one do you want? Grandpa will make it for you," the old man said to Amy with a smile. I want. Amy looked at the various birds and beasts on the wheel, and finally chose a fat tiger. Soon, the fat tiger candy man was made. With its delicate whiskers and silly appearance, it looked very cute. Thank you. Meg nodded at the old man. Thank you, Grandpa. Amy took the candy man and said obediently. She held Meg's hand and walked forward. Then, she looked up at Ugly Duckling, which had slipped onto Meg's shoulder, and said, Ugly Duckling, did you see that? If you continue to eat like this, you'll become fat like this. Crunch. Amy bit off half of the tiger's head, and nodded as she chewed. Delicious. Ugly Duckling looked at the candy tiger in Amy's hand, and its eyes widened. Chapter 10:10. After strolling around the Western City Market for the whole morning, he was prepared to eat the yellow clay roast chicken made by the two Orc brothers. This kind of roast chicken had the same effect as the beggar's chicken, and its cooking method gave Meg a little surprise. However, it was only limited to the cooking method. The control of the fire is too bad. The chicken is too dry and has lost the texture of the chicken itself. The seasoning is too crude and simple. What the hell is that spicy grayish seasoning on the outside of the chicken? It's fine if there's no lotus leaves, but what's with not even plucking the chicken feathers? Although the chicken feathers are quite clean after the yellow clay is cracked open, is it really okay to eat this kind of dry cleaning method? Meg complained silently in his heart. After watching the Orc's cooking method, he had already lost his appetite for the roast chicken in his hand. What did you say? At that moment, the two Orcs who were roasting the chicken looked at Meg angrily and shouted. The people around also looked at Meg one after another with expressions of watching a show. Meg looked at the two Orcs who were nearly 2 meters tall with strong bodies and froze for a moment. He shook his head and said, I didn't say anything. He was just grumbling in his heart. Could it be that these two fellows could read his mind? Meg was a little confused. Father, you said their roast chicken wasn't delicious, Amy whispered as she took a bite of the drumstick. Meg raised his eyebrows. Did he really say that? Who are you? Could it be that they're here to cause trouble for us? This is the yellow clay roast chicken method passed down from our ancestors. The secret seasoning is unparalleled in the world. In our tribe, we make the best chicken. You must apologize to us today. The bald Orc on the left cracked his knuckles and waited for Meg to drink. Ding! The system has detected that the host has once again ridiculed chefs. A hidden mission has been triggered. Please make the perfect beggar's chicken within 3 days. The system will provide a beggar's chicken recipe and experience bag, but this time, the test field for the god of cookery will not be provided. If the mission is successful, the host will receive a chance to use the god of cooking wheel. After accumulating 2 chances, the host will be able to select a recipe. If you fail the mission, you will have a deduction of 0.5 strength points, and you will have to apologize to the chef in question. At this moment, the system's voice rang in Meg's mind. Fuck. System, you tricked me. Meg raised his eyebrows. He finally understood that the system had purposely expanded his thoughts, causing the words that he had silently ridiculed in his heart to become words that he directly said out loud. This was equivalent to smashing his reputation in front of others. Even back then, he rarely did things like smashing his reputation. After all, if there was a conflict, those people who cursed him to death every day might rush out of the kitchen with knives. His tens of millions of anti-fans couldn't protect him. Therefore, he would usually post on Weibo to complain after he went back. However, he didn't panic too much. After all, the 2 Orcs were only around level 2. They were just normal Orcs, and Amy could take on 10 of them. However, Meg was a civilized person after all. If someone couldn't cook the chicken well, that was because they weren't skilled enough. It wasn't worthwhile to fight over such a small matter. However, this chicken was really bad. Since the system had already expanded and issued such a bullshit mission, there was no need for Meg to hide anymore. He took a step forward before Amy could make a fireball. He smiled and said, "I bought your roast chicken, so I'm naturally a customer. Whether your roast chicken tastes good or not, it's not up to you to decide. The customer has to try it and judge for himself. What I said just now is how I feel after tasting your roast chicken. You're doing business, not robbing people for a living. Can't you allow others to speak the truth?" The onlookers nodded. Although Meg's words were a little overboard, what he said was not unreasonable. If the seller could decide whether it tasted good or not, wouldn't it be a joke? That orc looked at Meg's calm and composed manner, and his aura weakened instead. After all, this was Chaos City, and not like them in the tribe. If there was anything that they were dissatisfied with, they could just give it a beating, and they would naturally be convinced. However, the brothers made a living by cooking this yellow soil roast chicken. Naturally, they were unhappy that someone was speaking ill of them. If they didn't get an explanation and let Meg admit his mistake, their reputation would be ruined in the future. That orc at the side rolled up his sleeves and walked out. He glared at Meg and said, "Bastard, you're deliberately slandering us. In Chaos City, can you find another roast chicken that tastes better than ours? I think you're just itching for a beating. If you're a man, then fight with me. See if I don't tear your nonsense mouth apart. Eugene, don't be rash." Fabian, the orc at the side, reached out to stop that orc. His younger brother's temper was a little rash, and he would get angry when provoked. Before Meg could say anything, Amy, who was at the side, was already looking at Eugene excitedly. "Fight? Sure, sure. Father would be bullying the young if he were to beat you up. Why don't the two of us fight? I love fighting. As long as you don't say that I'm bullying the young." Everyone looked at Amy, and their eyes lit up. She had silver hair, big blue eyes, and an exquisite face that looked like it was carved by the gods. She was wearing a little rabbit hat on her head, and holding a chicken drumstick in her hand. She looked so adorable. But this little fellow wasn't even as tall as that orc's waist, and she actually wanted to fight on behalf of her father. And she even said that the orc wouldn't think that she was bullying the young. Although she was talking big, she was still so adorable when she was bragging. Meg also smiled. Amy wasn't bragging. This little fellow already had the strength of a fifth-tier beast. If they really fought, it would really be bullying the young. Eugene stared at Amy for a while, and the corner of his mouth twitched. He looked up at Meg and said, "Is there a father like you? What's the point of letting such a cute little fellow out as a shield? If you have the ability, then fight on your own. I don't hit women and children. You're quite principled." Meg wanted to laugh, but this big brother's principles didn't embarrass him. Otherwise, it would be so embarrassing to be beaten up by a 4-year-old girl. "I'm here to play today, not to fight. I'm also a chef, and I didn't control my mouth for a moment, so I've offended you. But since I've already said it, I won't take it back. This is indeed how I feel after tasting this dish. If you're not convinced, you can bring your things to Amy's in the Aiden Square to find me in 3 days." Meg looked at Fabian and said, "Chefs naturally have their own way of battling. Then let's have a roast chicken battle. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, wonderful book mobile version website, .com.o. Chapter 10-11. Meg cursed the system 10 times in his heart. He had no idea why he had to play a duel, so he continued to walk around the market with a regretful look on his face. Big brother, are we just going to let that guy off like that? Eugene was unconvinced. Eugene, how many times have I told you? This is Chaos City. Think before you do anything. If you break the rules, you will be locked up. By then, we won't be able to continue our roast chicken business, and we'll have to go back to the tribe, Fabian said helplessly. But that guy, since he has already arranged a roast chicken duel with us, then let's wait for 3 days before going to the place he mentioned and have a fair duel with him. He's right. Chefs have their own way of dueling. Fighting and killing isn't like being a chef. Fabian interrupted Eugene's words. Mamie's? It seems to be a rather famous restaurant, right? Could that be the boss? Wasn't the missing person notice posted by Mamie's 2 days ago? I heard from them that the food in that restaurant is super delicious. In that case, we can go and watch the show 3 days later. The passers-by were also discussing animatedly. Some were even prepared to go and watch the show. After strolling around for a while more, Meg brought Amy back to the restaurant. The little fellow brought Ugly Duckling to the magic potion shop to play with black coal and green pea, while he returned to the kitchen to study the experience bag he had received. As usual, he opened that shiny experience bag, and a beggar's chicken recipe and experience poured into his mind. Speaking of beggar's chicken, the most famous one was naturally Changshu beggar's chicken. It was very popular because of the legend of the Condor heroes, but it was already very difficult to eat the traditional method of wrapping it in yellow mud and roasting it with charcoal. Meg had only eaten it twice. The first time was not bad, and the other time, he left after only eating a little. In modern kitchens, the microwave oven or the big oven had become the trend and the status quo. Even the lotus leaves were mostly omitted. However, if one wanted to taste the authentic beggar's chicken, they naturally had to use the traditional method. The beggar's chicken recipe provided by the system could be considered an improved version of the traditional beggar's chicken. However, the yellow mud, lotus leaves, and charcoal roasting were not omitted because of the trouble. Without these, the beggar's chicken would lose its soul. Without the opportunity to enter the test field for the god of cookery, there were only 3 short days. Meg had to make the best use of his time to make delicious beggar's chicken. Fortunately, the system had opened up the right to use ingredients and provided the kitchen utensils needed to cook beggar's chicken. At that moment, there was a 3-tier carbon oven beside the roast duck stove. It was a high-efficiency carbon oven specially designed by the system to roast beggar's chicken. Meg closed his eyes and digested the sudden influx of information in his mind. When he opened his eyes again, his vision was clear. Alright, let's start with the chicken. Meg took the apron that was hanging at the side and tied it around himself. He then took out a 3 yellow chicken that had been brushed with wool from the fridge. Father, Sister Cece also wants to attend the birthday banquet tonight. Should we set off now? When it was almost evening, Amy poked her little head out of the kitchen door and asked Meg. Meg looked at the 3 yellow chicken that had been stuffed in his hand and nodded with satisfaction. He glanced at his watch and saw that it was almost 5 o'clock. He quickly stuffed the 3 yellow chicken back into the fridge and said as he took off his apron, "Yes, we should set off now. Amy told me about that child. I want to go take a look. Maybe I can provide some help to him," Cece said as she looked at Meg at the entrance of the restaurant. "Your healing magic is so powerful. If it's possible, it's that child's luck." Meg nodded. Up until now, Cece was the most powerful healing magic he had ever seen. The nature magic of a great druid was indeed very effective in healing. A wooden sign had been hung at the entrance of an ice cream shop. The curtains were lowered, blocking all gazes. Meg knocked on the door, and Mia quickly opened the door. She looked at Meg and the others standing at the door, and said with a smile, "Boss, you're here. How's the decorating going?" Meg asked as he walked in. It's almost done. Because our shop is originally an ice and snow themed, we don't need to decorate much. Mia nodded. Only then did she notice Cece and Lulu behind Meg and the others. She said in surprise, "Sister Cece, you're here too." "Yes, I want to see that child and see if I can do anything for him," Cece said with a nod. Mia said in surprise, "That's great. Sister Cece's magic is so powerful. Little Kyle will definitely be cured. Let's not tell them about this first." "I still have many illnesses that can't be cured," Cece said cautiously. I understand." Mia nodded. The temperature in the ice cream shop was even colder than outside. The temperature was probably below zero. Apart from the white decorations and furnishings, there were 20 centimeters of snow on the restaurant's display windows and open space. It looked as if they were in a world of ice and snow. Elizabeth, Phyrus, and the others were all there. Anna was sitting in a corner, making a little snowman. Blower, who had changed back into his male attire, was sitting at the side and watching quietly. Hearing the sound, Anna turned around and waved to Amy. "Amy, come over quickly. Let's make a little snowman. Sister Elizabeth made a lot of snow for us just now." Okay. Amy replied happily. She put Ugly Duckling on the ground and ran towards Anna. Meow! Ugly Duckling shuddered at the thought of leaving Amy's warm embrace, but it quickly ran after her happily. However, it didn't stop in time, and plunged headfirst into a thick pile of snow in a corner, leaving only its 2 hind legs and a tail dangling outside. It was unable to struggle free. "See, I told you you're fat. You didn't believe me. Even the snow can get you stuck." Amy grabbed Ugly Duckling's 2 legs and pulled it out of the snow with a light pop, leaving a cat print on the snow. Meow! Ugly Duckling shook its head to shake off the snow on its head and looked at Amy innocently. Amy ignored it and squatted down beside Anna. She looked at the little rabbits, lambs, and other small animals that Anna had made. She couldn't help but praise, "Big Sister Anna, you're so awesome. The little snowmen you made are so beautiful. Amy can do it too." "It's super easy," Anna said with a smile. "Can I do it too?" "Then I'll make an ugly duckling first." Amy nodded. Then, she picked up a big ball of snow and kneaded it into a round snowball. She then poked 3 holes in it and placed it beside Ugly Duckling. She nodded with satisfaction. It's exactly the same. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, Wonderful Book Mobile Version, .com. Chapter 10-12. Meow, meow. Ugly Duckling looked at the round snowball with a perplexed expression. Anna also stared at the snowball for a long while before holding back her laughter and continuing to make the snowman. Yabamia looked at Meg and asked, "Boss, do you think our arrangement is okay? You've put in a lot of effort into it. I believe little Kyle will like it when he sees it." Meg nodded. He wrapped his clothes tighter around himself and said, "However, the temperature seems to be a little too low for the patient. Although the theme tonight is ice and snow, it's still not good if the temperature is too low. But if the temperature rises, the ice and snow will melt," Mia said. "Leave this to me." Meg walked towards the control panel of the central air conditioner. Area temperature control. This was one of the basic functions of the heating system that the system had set up. However, it was a little complicated to operate. Usually, Mia and the rest would just use a button to operate it. The system had set the temperature and humidity that were most suitable for the day's weather to bring the customers the most comfortable dining experience. The heating system was turned on, and the temperature in the central area gradually rose to about 20 degrees Celsius. Meanwhile, the temperature in the peripheral areas remained at 0 degrees Celsius. The setting that they had spent time setting up wouldn't change because of the rise in temperature. Feeling the rise in temperature and the air become warmer, Meg nodded with satisfaction. Although he might not be able to help that child, if this was his last birthday, he hoped that he could have a happy birthday. Mia walked around the peripheral area a few times, and said with surprise, "It's really only the central area that has become warmer." "Boss, you're amazing. Is the ice cream cake ready?" Meg walked towards the work area. Mia followed him and said, "It's ready. Mr. Curtis paid the deposit and wanted the biggest cake, so we made a 32-inch 3-layer ice cream cake." It had to be said that Mia was indeed talented in making desserts and cakes. On the top of the 32-inch ice cream cake were 2 orcs, one big and one small, leaning on each other and looking into the distance. Their lifelike eyes were filled with hope. "Very good." Meg nodded. This had already exceeded the scope of what he had taught Mia. This could only be considered as a gift. This is a birthday party. Everyone, relax and let the children play happily. Meg walked out of the work area and said to the people in the dining room. Everyone nodded, understanding what Meg meant. Ding! A bell rang outside the door. "Coming." Mia's eyes lit up as she walked towards the door. The door opened, and a tall and thin orc stood at the door, holding the hand of a thin and weak orc. The lights in the shop suddenly dimmed, and colorful lights lit up, illuminating the ice and snow. A beautiful world of ice and snow appeared in front of everyone. The little beastman's listless eyes suddenly lit up as if he had seen a new continent. The sparkling snow fairies and the snowy scenery made him feel as if he had entered a dream. "Wow, it's so beautiful," the little beastman exclaimed. The little beastman exclaimed as he involuntarily let go of his father's hand and walked into the ice cream shop. This was like a scene after a heavy snowfall. Thick layers of snow and little snowmen were piled up in the snow. Everything looked so real, and a pure smile appeared on his pale face. Curtis's eyes were filled with tears. Ever since he fell ill, he hadn't seen Kyle smile for a long time. He looked at everyone in the shop with gratitude. "What a pity. I didn't get to see what it looks like when it snows," Kyle said with a slight disappointment. "Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you." Right at this moment, a gentle birthday song sounded, and Phyllis and Bobla slowly walked out with a small dining cart. There was a huge ice cream cake with a series of thin candles on it. At the same time, snowflakes floated in the sky. Snowflakes appeared out of nowhere and slowly drifted down. "It's snowing. It's snowing." Little Kyle was stunned for a moment and cried out in surprise. He reached out his little hand to catch the snowflakes. The snowflakes fell on his hand and were icy cold. They melted very quickly. The smile on his face became even brighter, as if he had seen the most beautiful thing in the world. Curtis turned his head away and wiped his tears. He looked at little Kyle with reddened eyes. If he wasn't sick, he would be such a good child. Why did this illness find my child? Why did he have to suffer this kind of pain? What kind of illness is this? Why is his skin so pale? Meg frowned slightly as he looked at Kyle. Usually, beastmen had green skin, but this child looked like a faded beastman. The visible skin on his body had almost turned white. He must have been tortured by the illness until he was only skin and bones. He was only a 5 or 6-year-old child. This made Meg feel a little worried. Mia walked in front of little Kyle with a crown and put it on his head. She smiled and said, "Little Kyle, happy birthday to you." "Happy birthday." Everyone smiled and said. The atmosphere was warm and lively. "Thank you, Sister Mia." "Thank you." "Thank you, everyone." Kyle looked at the big cake and the smiles on everyone's faces. Tears welled up in his eyes as he spoke with a choked voice. "This is the birthday party your father prepared for you. Let us celebrate your birthday with you today," Mia said. Kyle nodded and turned to look at Curtis. "Thank you, Father." Mia smiled and said, "I heard that if you make a wish before you blow out the candles, it will definitely come true. Now, little Kyle, close your eyes and make a wish. Then, blow out the candles with Father." Curtis walked up, lifted Kyle up, and walked to the cake. Kyle closed his eyes and put his palms together in front of him, making a wish silently. Then, he opened his eyes and blew out the candles with Curtis. "I hope that even if I leave, Father will still be able to live on healthily and happily," Kyle looked at Curtis and said softly. Curtis hugged Kyle tightly and cried silently. The atmosphere in the shop quietened down instantly. Everyone couldn't bear to see this scene. Such a good child. How did he get such a strange illness? After blowing out the candles, is it time to eat the cake? At this moment, Amy popped her head out and asked. She looked at the 3-layer ice cream cake and swallowed her saliva. After a moment of silence, everyone's expressions were a little strange. Curtis wiped away his tears and also squeezed out a smile, saying, "Little Kyle, cut the cake with Daddy and share it with your brothers, sisters, and children. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, wonderful book mobile version website, .com. Chapter 10:13. The rich fruits covered the surface of the ice cream cake, and the cake was easily cut into perfect pieces with a cake knife that had been scalded with hot water. Then, the cake was placed on a small plate and passed to everyone. The sharing of delicacies made the atmosphere in the shop livelier again. Little Kyle also had a smile on his face. Ever since he fell sick, his father had stopped letting him eat ice cream. Whether it was snowflakes or ice cream, they were all his favorite things. Now that he had them all, he felt so blissful. After eating the ice cream cake, little Kyle's spirits were obviously much better. He went to the side with Amy and Anna to build a little snowman and have a snowball fight. They were having a lot of fun. Looking at the smiling Kyle, Curtis bowed deeply to Meg and the rest with reddened eyes, and gratefully said, "Thank you. Thank you so much." "You're welcome, Mr. Curtis. We only did what we could." Meg shook his head. He could understand the hardships and pain of a father who had been working so hard for his child. Mia hesitated and asked, "Mr. Curtis, what do you plan to do next?" Curtis sadly said, "The doctor said that there's no other way. I plan to bring him back to the Orcs tomorrow and let him see Grandfather." At this moment, Cece stepped forward and said to Curtis, "I am a healing-type magic caster. Although I can't guarantee that I can cure the child's illness, if you don't mind, perhaps you can let me check on the child's condition." A glimmer of hope appeared in Curtis's eyes, and he hurriedly said, "Then, I'll have to trouble you." Cece walked towards the children who were playing. She didn't check on Kyle directly, but played with the children instead. Then, she summoned the World Tree in the name of playing a little game, and green light shrouded Kyle's body. How could this be? Cece couldn't bear to see him like this. She urged the World Tree to inject green light into Kyle's body. A yellow leaf fell from the treetop, and Kyle's pale face regained some color. "Kyle, he..." Curtis looked nervously at Cece, who was walking back. The others were also looking forward to it. Cece shook her head apologetically. "The child's condition is very serious. His bodily functions are almost withered, and the process is still going on. It is completely irreversible and uncontrollable. All I can do is to supplement his bodily functions. It can delay the illness for a short time, but it can only last for about 10 days at most." 10 days. Curtis felt a little lost, but he still wanted to bow to Cece and say gratefully, thank you." Everyone sighed silently in their hearts. Cece's words were tantamount to a death notice for Kyle. 10 days would be his last day in this world. "System, can you use the omniscient door to examine Kyle's body and see what illness he has? Is there any possibility of treatment?" Mag asked in his heart. This feeling of watching but not being able to do anything was really unbearable. If the host wishes to open an omniscient door in a foreign land, the host will need to pay a relocation fee, the system replied. 99 copper coins, no more. Hey! Host, you can't even give me 100 copper coins for such a complicated matter. Isn't this too much? The system said angrily. 100 copper coins it is then. Deal, the system said decisively. Begin scanning. Kyle, work, male, has acute leukemia. His condition is in the terminal stage. Meg looked at the information that appeared in his mind with a heavy heart. Acute leukemia in the terminal stage was equivalent to a death sentence. It was no different from Cece's judgment. System, didn't you claim to be omnipotent? Even Earth has developed targeted treatment. You shouldn't have a problem developing some highly effective medicine for leukemia, right? Meg said with a hint of provocation. The system stands on the shoulders of human civilization. Naturally, developing some highly effective medicine is not a problem. However, this is a foreign land. As a candidate for the god of cookery, can't the host solve such a simple problem? Isn't this a problem that can be solved with a dish? The system said. Meg raised his eyebrows. Was the system implying something? Could it be that there was a miracle medicine that could treat leukemia in the dishes he cooked? Host, the ingredients in the restaurant were planted and reared by the system in various places where the spiritual energy of heaven and earth gathered. If it was in the Xianxia world, it would be a legendary treasure. Just a random carrot would be enough to make those immortal cultivators fight over it. Let's not talk about other things. Just the fiery pig on Fire Dragon Island feeds on the iron ore in the volcanic rocks on Fire Dragon Island. It is rich in iron and has absorbed the explosive properties of the volcanic rocks. It is a natural leukemia medicine. Although I usually keep a low profile, host, as a qualified candidate for the god of cookery, you should still know the most basic knowledge. Otherwise, how can you serve the customers the medicine, the dishes? There was a strong sense of superiority in the system's voice. Meg didn't want to bother about the system's pretentiousness anymore. It was indeed awesome to be able to cultivate a pig into a special medicine. System, Kyle's leukemia is already in the late stage. Are you sure his body can still recover after eating the red braised pork made from the fiery pig? Meg asked nervously. 3 meals a day. Take 500 grams of red braised pork and eat it with white rice. 7 days for 1 course of treatment. He will recover after 7 courses of treatment, the system answered. This is forcing me to become the new generation's king of medicine. Meg thought with mixed feelings. However, the system's words were undoubtedly great news. Meg looked at the worried Curtis and said, Mr. Curtis, I am the owner of Amy's, Meg. I am also the owner of this ice cream shop. I have seen little Kyle's condition before, and I also have an ancient prescription. If you believe me, perhaps you can give it a try. Is what you said true? Curtis looked at Mag in surprise when he heard that. He had brought little Kyle to so many famous doctors in the past few months, and a few of them had seen this illness before. However, all the people who contracted this illness had died, and the doctors were at their wits' end. I have seen someone cure this disease with this before. Meg nodded firmly. At times like this, he had to convince himself first. Otherwise, he would be too embarrassed to say that he could cure leukemia with a bowl of red braised pork. Mr. Meg, please save Kyle. I am willing to give up everything. I just hope that he can live. Curtis knelt in front of Meg with a plop. Mr. Curtis, please get up first. You don't have to do this. Meg hurriedly pulled Curtis up, then looked at him and said, if you want to cure little Kyle's disease, from tomorrow onwards, bring him to Amy's and order red braised pork with white rice for all 3 meals a day. If this continues for 49 days, his disease will be cured. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, Wonderful Book mobile version website, .com. Chapter 10:14. There was silence in the ice cream shop. Everyone looked at Meg with strange expressions. Meg actually said that a strange disease that even nature magic couldn't cure could be cured by going to the restaurant and eating red braised pork for 3 meals a day. Wasn't this too ridiculous? Blower looked at Meg and thought with a slight frown, he's not even letting go of the money of a child who's about to leave this world. Isn't that too much? Although Boss's food is indeed delicious and miraculous, can it really cure little Kyle's illness? Mia was also a little uncertain. Although Meg had always been very reliable, this concerned little Kyle's survival, after all. Could it really be cured by a bowl of red braised pork? Curtis also opened his mouth, but didn't know what to say for a moment. This was the first time he had heard the word cured from someone else's mouth. He had failed to treat Kyle repeatedly, and seeing Kyle's condition getting worse and worse, he actually didn't have much hope in his heart. But this gentleman opened a restaurant, after all, and not a pharmacy. And his so-called ancient recipe wasn't any medicinal herbs or treatment methods. It was just going to his restaurant to eat, and he even pointed out one of the dishes. If they met outside, he would definitely give this liar a big slap in the face. But after all, they had just organized such an elaborate birthday party for Kyle, and that young lady Magic Caster had even extended Kyle's life for 10 days. This Mr. Meg didn't look like a liar, which put him in a difficult position. Mr. Mac, the child's condition may be more serious than you think. Cece looked at Meg and stopped talking. She knew that Meg's dishes did indeed have many miraculous effects, and even gave his world tree a new lease of life. But she had just checked little Kyle's body. His bodily functions had been completely destroyed, and there was no way to save him even with life magic. As expected, even I don't dare to believe what I just said. Meg looked at everyone's expressions, and felt a little helpless. If it were him, he would probably have punched them in the face. Amy walked out with a snowball in her hand. She looked at Meg and said with certainty, Father said that he can be cured, so he definitely can be cured. I believe in Father. I believe in Uncle Meg too. Anna nodded. Looking at the trusting gazes of the 2 little fellows, Meg also gradually believed in himself. He looked at Curtis and said calmly, Mr. Curtis, you might find this a little unbelievable, but I can take responsibility for my words. Of course, you are little Kyle's father. You have the right to decide whether to believe me or not. Looking at Meg's expression, Cece thought for a while and stopped talking. She had always thought that Mr. Mac was a kind and steady person. He would never joke about such things. The fact that he spoke so confidently meant that he really had a way. Everyone's gaze also gradually became more convinced. The restaurant didn't lack customers at all. No matter how many people lined up, they wouldn't be able to eat it. They didn't need Meg to trick people into eating red braised pork. Curtis was a little hesitant. If Kyle was really going to leave, he wanted to bring him back to his hometown. He hadn't left Chaos City before. However, if what Meg said was true, and he missed a chance to save Kyle's life, he would definitely regret it for the rest of his life. Father, I want to try Uncle's method. Just then, little Kyle walked over, and reached out to hold Curtis's hand. He looked up at him, and said, I still want to live with you. Curtis's tears fell instantly. He wiped them away carelessly, and said to Meg, "Mr. Meg, I believe you. As long as you can cure Kyle, I am willing to give you all my assets. Please save him." Meg reached out to support Curtis, who was about to kneel down again. He shook his head with a smile, and said, "I don't want your assets. You just have to pay the bill when you order every day. There are more customers in the restaurant, so remember to bring the children to line up earlier." "All right, I will." Curtis nodded vigorously with gratitude in his eyes. The children played in the snow for a while longer, and this birthday party ended in a happy atmosphere. After opening the door, the 3 children ran out first. "It's snowing. It's really snowing." Amy's surprised voice came from outside. Everyone walked out, and their faces were also filled with surprise. The light snowflakes fell slowly from the sky, and it looked extremely beautiful. Yabamiya reached out to catch a few snowflakes, and watched them melt in her palm as she said with a smile, "The first snow of this year came earlier than the previous years." Although the children had already played in the snow for the whole night, they were still very excited to see the snowflakes filling the sky. "All right, Amy, we should go back. We still have lessons tomorrow," Meg said with a smile. "Goodbye, everyone." Amy carried Ugly Duckling and waved to everyone. She ran to Meg's side and held his hand. Everyone also bade farewell and left. In the carriage, Kyle looked at his father, who was hugging him, and said with a smile, "Father, I'm so happy today." "Thank you. Father is very happy too." Curtis hugged Kyle tightly, and gently said, "It's okay. You'll get better very soon. Then, you can have a snowball fight with the children in the snow." "Really?" "Of course." After washing up, Amy lay on the little bed, and put her little hand on Ugly Duckling's stomach to warm it up. She looked at Meg, who was sitting by the bed, expectantly, and said, "Father, will the whole world be covered in snow tomorrow morning?" "If the snow tonight is heavy enough, it should be like that." Meg nodded with a smile. According to the days on Earth, it was almost the new year. He didn't know if that cold family could still gather together without him. However, it should only be as cold as usual. That's great. It must be super beautiful. Amy's eyes sparkled as she said happily. Meg looked at the smiling Amy, and his heart suddenly skipped a beat. He didn't know how many years it had been since he celebrated the new year. Because they couldn't even gather together to celebrate the new year, he gradually became the one who was absent. However, it was different now. He had Amy. Celebrating the new year with her would be like celebrating the Mid-Autumn Festival. It would be very interesting, right? "Father, what story are you going to tell me today?" Amy asked. "Today, Father will tell you a story about Nyen." Meg smiled and said, "Once upon a time, in a place called China, there was a monster called Nyen. It had sharp horns on its head, and was very ferocious and terrifying. No pop-up window." Chapter 10-15. Meg told the story of the Nyen beast in a gentle voice. It was different from normal fairy tales, but Amy was still listening with great interest. The Nyen beast was scared away by the sound of firecrackers. From then on, every year on New Year's Eve, every family would put up red couplets and set off firecrackers. Every household would be brightly lit, and everyone would stay up until the new year. No matter where they go, they would try their best to return home to celebrate the new year and have a reunion dinner together. New Year's Eve dinner. Amy's eyes lit up. She looked at Meg with anticipation, and asked, "Does staying up until the sun rises?" Meow, Ugly Duckling also poked its little head out and looked at Meg. "Well." Meg was slightly taken aback. He nodded with a smile, and said, "You can think of it that way. That would be super blissful." Amy looked at Meg longingly and said, "Father, let's also celebrate the new year. We can also have a reunion dinner until the sun rises." If Amy wants to celebrate the new year, then let's celebrate the new year. Meg nodded with a smile. He thought for a moment, and then said, "But according to the time, we still have to wait for another month before the new year. Father said that everyone will be reunited during the new year. What about Mother? Will she come back? Will she also celebrate the new year with us?" Amy looked at Meg with anticipation in her eyes. Meg's heart tightened when he met Amy's gaze. Although he had already met Irina in Rodu, Amy didn't know that she was her mother. The current situation of the elven race was unclear. He was still not powerful enough, and Irina couldn't bear to leave her pitiful brethren behind. It was still unknown when Amy would be able to reunite with her and their family. He was a little conflicted as to how to answer this question. Amy is super happy as long as I'm with Father. Amy seemed to notice Meg's hesitation. She smiled sweetly at him, closed her eyes, and whispered, "Good night, Father." Meg looked at the obedient Amy and felt a little upset. He got up and gently kissed Amy on the forehead and said, "Good night, Amy." Ugly Duckling tucked its head under the blanket and hugged one of Amy's little hands as it quickly fell asleep. Strength is truly a depressing thing. Meg sighed and tiptoed out of the door. He went downstairs, put on the apron again, closed the kitchen door, and continued to study the cooking method of Beggar's Chicken. The Wind Forest. In a dark hall, a middle-aged elf looked worriedly at Borg, who was sitting high up, and said anxiously, "My lord, Helena has already gathered hundreds of rebel elves at the southwest corner of the periphery of the Wind Forest and formed a rebel army. Furthermore, more and more elves are joining these days, and the scale is increasing day by day. What should we do? It's just a rebel army formed by a few hundred low-level elves. What's there to be alarmed about?" A stiff smile appeared on Borg's face as he said, "However, this is a good opportunity to get rid of Irina. I'll let her develop a little more. When she starts to invade the Wind Forest, it'll be the end of her and those idiots. But High Priestess Helena, that old hag, should be more anxious than us. She has always been trying to unite the elven race. What Irina is doing now is a slap to her face. I'd like to see how long she can keep her cool. She'll come for me sooner or later, hee hee." A sinister chuckle echoed in the hall. "High Priestess, another 30 elves have joined the rebel army. Apart from slaves, there are 6 nobles among them." A figure hurriedly ran into the starry cavern mansion. Helena's face seemed to be covered with a layer of frost. She said coldly, "Have you found out who they are?" "A few family leaders have already knelt outside the cave and asked for forgiveness." "Should I let them in?" "No need. Beat each of them 50 times, then lock up their eldest son in the prison. Tell them that if the same thing happens again, their successors will be gone. Spread the word. If one rebels, the whole family will be punished." "Yes." That elf quickly walked away. "Irina, are you trying to destroy the efforts of the Queen and I over the past few hundred years?" Helena looked up at the brightest star in the sky with a cold expression. "Although I watched you grow up, if you really want to do this, I can only kill you." The periphery of the Wind Forest, in a canyon in the southwest direction. A simple fortress had already begun to take shape. A slender figure stood at the highest point of the fortress, looking in the direction of the Wind Forest quietly. The wind blew her white dress, which was still beautiful in the dark night. A young elf walked up behind her, and said respectfully, "Your Highness, the 3 lines of defense have been set up perfectly. However, if a 10th tier powerhouse comes, I'm afraid the lines of defense won't be able to stop them." There was fanatical worship in his eyes. In just a few days, a rebel army had been formed outside the Wind Forest. There was also an endless stream of elves rushing over from the Wind Forest. She had an aura that made people believe in her, and she also had an aura that made people's blood boil. Her words about freedom were like enlightenment to many of the elves. Even if they were facing death, they were not afraid at all. If a 10th tier invades, I will deal with it, Irina said calmly. Yes, that elf replied, and quickly walked away. The situation is much better than expected. A free soul can't be completely restrained. Let's wait a little longer. It's time to start the counterattack. A smile appeared on Irina's face. After a while, she turned around and looked toward the south. Little Amy, give me some more time. We will be together very soon. Wow! The world has really turned white. Amy exclaimed in surprise when she woke up at the crack of dawn. She went to the window and pulled open the curtains. She looked at the world covered in white snow. It's really white. Meg got up and walked to the window to look out. The whole world was covered in a thick layer of snow. The trees, the roofs, the sculptures. Everywhere was white. More than 10 centimeters of snow had accumulated overnight. It was as if they were in a fairy tale world. Meow, meow, Ugly Duckling also clung to the window excitedly. Father, I want to go down and play in the snow. Amy said to Meg as she turned around. Okay, but you have to wear warm clothes and gloves. Meg nodded dotingly. He changed Amy into a thick cotton-padded jacket and put on a pair of fluffy waterproof gloves for her before letting her go out to play. Ugly Duckling followed behind Amy and plunged into the snow. After a while, it struggled to climb out. Then, it plunged into another pile of snow, enjoying itself. Early in the morning, Curtis brought Kyle to line up outside the restaurant. No pop-up window. Chapter 10:16. Father, is red braised pork a kind of medicine? Will it be very bitter? Kyle looked up at Curtis, a hint of nervousness in his expression. Mr. Meg said it's a dish, so it shouldn't be bitter. I'm not afraid of bitterness. Even if it's bitter, I'll finish it all, Kyle said with a nod and a smile on his face. Curtis stroked Kyle's head with heartache. The little fellow had been taking all kinds of medicine almost every day recently, and most of them were extremely bitter. Even adults found it hard to swallow them, but he had never resisted them. Meg, who was sending Amy to class, saw Curtis and his son standing at the front of the line, and nodded at them with a smile. Amy also greeted them before leaving on her bicycle. There are so many people. Uncle Meg must be a super awesome chef, right? Yes, he should be super awesome. Curtis nodded in agreement. It was his first time seeing a long line at the restaurant's entrance before it even opened. The restaurant opened for business, and the customers entered one after another. Curtis and Kyle sat down by the window. Kyle sized up the restaurant curiously, and praised softly, "What a beautiful restaurant. It's as beautiful as the ice cream shop." Yes. Curtis nodded in agreement. He also looked around in surprise. He had been to most of the restaurants in Chaos City, but he had never seen one that was so exquisitely decorated. Yabamiya walked to the table and smilingly said to Kyle, "Hello, little Kyle." "Hello, big sister Mia," little Kyle replied happily. Little Kyle replied happily. He really liked this big sister who could make delicious ice cream. "Miss Mia, we'd like a set of red braised pork," Curtis said to Yabamiya. "All right." Mia nodded and smilingly said, "Aren't you going to order your own breakfast, Mr. Curtis? Boss's culinary skills are really superb." Curtis thought for a while, and smilingly said to little Kyle beside him, "Then I'll have a set of red braised pork too." "All right, please wait a moment." Yabamiya nodded with a smile, and turned to walk towards the kitchen. Delicacies were the best medicine to cure everything. The dishes ordered by the customers were served one by one. Although there were different races sitting together, there wasn't a noisy scene. The customers enjoyed their breakfast quietly with blissful smiles on their faces. Just looking at them made them feel relaxed and happy. Gulp. Kyle looked at the elf eating the Yangzhou fried rice elegantly and blissfully, and couldn't help but swallow his saliva. He felt that his taste buds that had been filled with all sorts of medicinal scents ever since he fell sick, and was gradually waking up under the temptation of this fragrance. What an alluring fragrance, of your red braised pork. Yabamiya placed 2 bowls of red braised pork and 2 bowls of rice in front of Curtis and Kyle before turning around with a smile. It smells so good. The fragrance of the red braised pork instantly gushed over, causing Curtis's and Kyle's gazes to shift from the Yangzhou fried rice to the red braised pork in front of them. In the black ceramic bowl was the red braised pork that was juicy and thick. The rich fragrance was so strong and aggressive that one couldn't ignore its existence. It wasn't as bloated and greasy as the fatty meat they usually saw. The red color looked very alluring, almost making one unable to recall the original appearance of the fatty meat. Is this red braised pork? Kyle asked in disbelief. In his imagination, all the medicine used to treat his illness would emit a disgusting bitter and stinky smell. But now, the red braised pork in front of him was emitting such an alluring fragrance, making him want to swallow his saliva uncontrollably. Yes, have a taste. Curtis's eyes were also filled with astonishment. However, he still picked up the long spoon and passed it to Kyle, saying with a smile. He still wasn't sure if Meg's method would work. He was still feeling uneasy. He had already bet everything on it, hoping that a miracle would really happen and that Kyle would no longer be tormented by his illness. Kyle took the long spoon and reached into the bowl, trying to cut a piece of red braised pork in half. A whole piece was a little too big for him. Curtis was about to help. It wasn't easy to cut a piece of meat with a spoon. However, Kyle's spoon cut through the skin easily, cutting the whole piece of red braised pork in half as if there was no resistance at all. The red braised pork that was cut open was soft but didn't fall apart. The inside was still red, and the red gravy had perfectly seeped into the meat. I'm going to start eating. Kyle put half of the red braised pork into his mouth. The sweet gravy instantly woke up his dormant taste buds. His taste buds, which had been tormented by all kinds of exotic herbs, were like rain after a long drought at this moment. They started to cheer. Under the chewy pork skin was the fatty meat that melted in his mouth. It was sweet and soft, fat but not greasy. With a light bite, the sweet gravy seeped out, and the wonderful taste blossomed on the tip of his tongue. The deliciousness that he hadn't tasted in a long time made little Kyle want to cheer. All the painful experiences during this period of time were thrown to the back of his mind at this moment. In front of such deliciousness, everything seemed to be not worth mentioning. The pain in his body also seemed to have disappeared in an instant. At this moment, he only wanted to carefully feel the deliciousness of this piece of red braised pork. He was immersed in it, unable to extricate himself. After swallowing a mouthful of red braised pork, little Kyle could clearly feel a warm current flowing down his throat and into his body. The pain brought about by his illness was obviously alleviating. Oh, it's so delicious, whoa. Father, other than ice cream, this is the most delicious food I've ever eaten. Kyle opened his eyes, his face slightly flushed as he looked at Curtis in surprise. Then eat more, Curtis said with a smile. Kyle nodded. He scooped up a spoonful of rice and put it into his mouth, chewing hard. He felt that even the most ordinary rice seemed to have become sweet and delicious. A mouthful of red braised pork followed by a mouthful of rice. He ate happily, a blissful smile on his face, completely immersed in it. Curtis looked at Kyle, feeling gratified. During this period of time, due to his health, Kyle had almost never had a proper meal. Every time, he would only eat a few mouthfuls before he couldn't eat anymore. He hadn't expected that he would take the initiative to eat today. Is it really so delicious? There was a hint of hesitation in Curtis's eyes. He picked up a piece of red braised pork with his chopsticks and put it into his mouth. The deliciousness blossomed in his mouth, causing Curtis's eyes to light up. This taste is simply unbelievable. How can there be such delicious food in this world? It's just ordinary pork. How can it be made into such a wonderful taste? Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, wonderful book mobile version website, .com.oo. Chapter 10:17. The father and son pair each had a bowl of red braised pork in front of them, and they ate it one mouthful after another. The delicious red braised pork paired with the soft and fragrant rice made people forget about their illnesses and difficulties. They only wanted to immerse themselves in this delicacy and feel the bliss brought by the delicious taste on the tip of their tongues. Ding! They almost touched the bottom of the empty bowl at the same time. The father and son smiled at each other. They had forgotten how long it had been since they had seen such carefree and relaxed smiles on each other's faces. Curtis quickly became nervous again. He looked at Kyle and said, "Kyle, do you feel anything? Does your body have any special reaction after eating the red braised pork?" "I feel." Kyle looked at his hands and clenched his fists tightly. He said in surprise, "Father, I feel that my strength has returned, and my body doesn't hurt anymore." "Really? Your body really doesn't hurt anymore?" Curtis stood up in surprise and joy. Even his voice was trembling. The customers looked at him, not knowing why this beast man was so happy. At Amy's, loud noises were not allowed. But the strange thing was that the service staff who would usually stop the customers from acting inappropriately all had smiles on their faces. They only watched quietly from the side and had no intention of stopping them. Yes, it's true." Kyle closed his eyes to confirm again and nodded with certainty. The pain in his body became more and more serious during the course of his illness. It was just that he gradually learned to make himself look less painful. This way, his father's pain would be reduced. But after eating the red braised pork, the pain in his body did disappear by a large margin. Although there was still some discomfort, compared to the previous pain, this discomfort was almost negligible. "That's great." Curtis hugged Kyle in his arms. Tears of joy rolled down his cheeks uncontrollably. In the past few months, he had experienced too much of the process of going from hope to despair. He had even thought of ending his and Kyle's lives so that he wouldn't have to suffer the torment of his illness. And this time, he finally saw the light of hope. "It's really effective. Boss is amazing," Yabamiya thought in surprise. His gaze towards Meg was full of admiration. Red braised pork can cure illnesses. Did Boss really drug the food? Shirley looked at Meg suspiciously. Everyone looked at Meg with a different gaze. They knew that little Kyle's illness was serious, but after eating a bowl of red braised pork, he immediately became lively again. Was this still a delicacy? This was simply a miracle medicine. Although Kyle was also very excited, he felt the gazes on him and said softly, "Father, we seem to have disturbed others from eating." Curtis also realized that he had forgotten himself. And bowed deeply to Meg, and said gratefully, "Mr. Meg." With of. Little Kyle's pale face regained some color, and his spirit was also much better. It seemed that the system didn't lie to him. Red braised pork was really a miracle medicine for little Kyle. After Curtis expressed his gratitude to Meg again, he didn't disturb Meg's cooking. After paying the bill, he left with Kyle. At noon, he brought Kyle to line up early in the morning, afraid that they would miss the opening hours. He no longer doubted Meg's words. He only wanted to bring Kyle to Amy's for 3 meals a day to eat red braised pork and watch as his illness gradually improved and he completely got rid of the pain. There was no painful treatment, only the bliss of enjoying delicious food. He had already thought about it. When Kyle's illness was completely cured, he would bring him back to the tribe and let him meet the elders in the tribe. Everyone has worked hard today. Go back and rest early. At night, after the opening hours, Meg said to everyone with a smile. Unknowingly, Amy's had become a big family. Mia, Barbara, Phyllis, Shirley, Anna, and Elizabeth all got along very harmoniously. This made Meg feel a little gratified. Everyone also said their goodbyes and left. "Father, did you feel like you were looking at your own harem just now?" Amy asked curiously. Meg raised his eyebrows and quickly shook his head. He said righteously, "How can I be that kind of person? Also, Amy, where did you hear the term harem?" Ever since Amy was successfully instigated by Irina, he felt like there was a ticking time bomb beside him that could explode at any time. This feeling was even stronger now. "Sister Camilla told me," Amy said honestly. "It's really that girl." Meg was angry and wanted to laugh at the same time. The Countess, who was a little chinibu, seemed to regard him as a love rival because of Gloria. However, there was clearly nothing between him and Miss Gloria. This was probably what the saying went, when you sit at home, trouble will fall from the sky. Meg couldn't just sit back and do nothing. He coughed softly and said, what she said is actually wrong. Your sister Mia and the others are waitresses at the restaurant, and I'm the restaurant's owner. Our relationship is an employer-employee relationship, not a harem." "Is that really the case?" Amy looked at Meg in disbelief. "Of course." Meg nodded firmly without even blinking. At this time, he had to stand firm. Otherwise, he didn't know what Amy would say to Irina the next time they met. This was a matter of life and death. "But, why are all the big sisters so beautiful?" Amy asked curiously. Meg was momentarily at a loss for words. He really didn't know how to explain things to children because no matter how he explained, it sounded like he was preparing for a harem. Right at this moment, the floor of the restaurant suddenly lit up with a golden light. An ancient teleportation spell formation appeared, and at the same time, a burst of magic fluctuations appeared. Someone's teleported here again. Could it be that they're here to find Barbara? Meg carried Amy out of the teleportation spell formation's range with a wary expression. Ugly Duckling, which was lying on the counter, had all of its fur standing on end. It jumped down from the counter and hugged Mag's leg, sitting on his leg nervously. "What's that?" Amy asked curiously. The golden light suddenly became dazzling before instantly receding. A figure also appeared in the empty space in the center of the restaurant. It was a beauty with long, reddish-golden hair and wearing a seashell seaweed dress. God! Water! Water, she only said a few words before fainting. Chapter 10:18. This is. Meg and Amy were both stunned when they saw the woman who had suddenly appeared in the restaurant and fainted before she could even finish her sentence. Meg glanced at the woman lying on the ground. Her sharp nose made her delicate face look even more three-dimensional. Her golden red wavy hair hung loosely over her shoulders, and her skin was as white as snow. Her full breasts were covered by 2 white seashells, but they still couldn't hide her eye-catching curves. She was wearing a seaweed skirt. The seaweed was already a little dry, and the bottom seemed to have been torn. Under the ragged skirt was a pair of long, slender legs. Her snow-white feet were not wearing shoes, and her tender white toes were like little lotus roots. They were white with a tinge of red, and looked very cute and attractive. Although he was not a foot fetish, Meg's gaze could not help but linger on that pair of jade feet for a while. He felt a little strange. Judging by the way this girl was dressed, could it be that she lived by the sea? But why was she suddenly teleported here and fainted as soon as she saw him? What a beautiful big sister. Amy's eyes lit up, and then she looked up at Meg and said, "Father, are you planning to take her into your harem?" Meg raised his eyebrows. The little one was getting more and more careless with her words. How could she say something like that? Even if he wanted to. Bah, he didn't want to at all. However, before Meg could explain, a rainbow-colored light suddenly lit up on the maiden lying on the ground. The light disappeared in a flash, and her long, fair legs turned into a big fishtail with rainbow-colored fish scales. Her upper body was still that of a human. She turned into a mermaid. Amy was shocked, and then asked curiously, "Is this a big sister mermaid or a big sister mermaid? Could this be the legendary mermaid?" Meg looked at the woman who had suddenly turned into a half-human, half-fish, and his expression suddenly became strange. But looking at the girl's pale face and frowning eyebrows, the situation didn't seem too good. Meg thought for a moment and hurriedly crouched down to carry her and walked towards the door. This mermaid was not heavy, probably around 80 kilograms. Her scales were as smooth as jade, and there was a slight coolness to them. It was not as sticky as ordinary fish, and there was a pleasant fragrance on her body. "Father, even if you want to prove that you don't want Big Sister Mermaid in your harem, it's not good to just throw her out like this, right?" Amy said as she followed behind Meg. Meow, meow, ugly duckling also quickly caught up with him. It stared at the swaying fish tail as if it was staring at a big prey, and was eager to give it a try. "I'm not throwing her away. I just want to see why she's unconscious," Meg replied helplessly. "I knew you couldn't bear to," Amy muttered. Meg, he could suddenly understand the feelings of those who were rendered speechless by Amy. Gina, mermaid, 18 years old, power fluctuating between 0 to 8. The more water one has, the more powerful they are. Currently severely dehydrated. Gina. Meg looked at the test results given by the omniscient door in his mind. So this beautiful mermaid was called Gina, and the reason she was unconscious wasn't because she was injured, but because she was severely dehydrated. Then, the words she said before she fainted were most likely water. Meg quickly put her down on a chair at the side, and walked quickly to the kitchen. He took a big kettle and filled it with water. He gently pried open her dry lips, and slowly poured the water into her mouth. However, Gina immediately spat out the water after he poured it in. Her breathing became rapid, and her face became even paler. "Father, what's wrong with Big Sister Mermaid?" Amy asked anxiously. "Shouldn't you replenish water if you're dehydrated?" Meg was also a little confused. He carried Gina and walked toward the door. "Father, I think Big Sister Mermaid can still be saved. Don't be in such a hurry to throw her away." "I didn't throw her away. I knew you couldn't bear to." Gina, mermaid, 18 years old, power fluctuating between 0 to 8. The more water one has, the more powerful they are. Currently severely dehydrated, accompanied by severe allergic reaction to fresh water and dyspnea. This is a seafood. Meg raised his eyebrows. He looked at the mermaid who was almost suffocating in his arms, and quickly ran upstairs with her in his arms. Amy looked at Meg's back, and said softly, "Father, although Big Sister Mermaid is unconscious and we don't know what happened, this isn't very good, right?" Meg, who was carrying Miss Mermaid upstairs, staggered and almost fell. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he turned back and said, "Amy, bring the salt jar up." If Big Sister Mermaid doesn't drink some water, she'll really turn cold. All right. Amy responded. She carried a small stool into the kitchen, and tiptoed to pick up the salt jar from the condiment table with some effort before running upstairs. He filled the bathtub with water, and then added a jar of salt according to the salt content of the average ocean. He made a bathtub of salt water with a salt content of 35 per thousand. I hope the salt content of the seawater in this world is not much different from that on Earth. Meg put Miss Mermaid, whose breathing was so weak that it was almost non-existent, into the bathtub. Pop, 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 following a series of bubbling sounds, the beautiful mermaid slowly sank to the bottom of the bathtub, and there was no movement. Father, is she and Big Sister Mermaid already dead? Amy asked with a sorrowful expression. Meow, ugly duckling squatted at the side, and its eyes were still fixed on the big fishtail that was sticking out of the bathtub. She should still be alive, right? Meg wasn't too sure either. Apart from blowing out small bubbles from her mouth occasionally, that mermaid really didn't move at all. She looked like she was already dead. Then shouldn't we try to save her? I heard from the teacher in class that we have to do mouth-to-mouth resuscitation or something, Amy continued. That's a good idea. Meg nodded thoughtfully. If her heart stopped, they still had to do chest compressions, right? Meg's gaze landed on Miss Mermaid's chest. That shell seemed to be in the way. Father, please save her quickly. I feel like Big Sister Mermaid can't breathe anymore. Amy lay beside the bathtub with a nervous expression. Since that's the case, I can only sacrifice myself. Meg nodded seriously. He rolled up his sleeves and reached his hand out to Miss Mermaid in the bathtub. Splash! Right at this moment, Miss Mermaid, who had been quiet all this while, suddenly swung her tail and created a splash of water, drenching Meg and Amy, who were standing beside the bathtub. Chapter 10:19. After wiping the salt water off his face, Meg looked at the mermaid who had turned over in the bathtub and was happily blowing bubbles with her eyes closed. Her expression was relaxed, and she swung her tail gently from time to time. He was speechless. Wow, it seems like Big Sister Mermaid doesn't need our help anymore. Since she's so beautiful, let's call her Big Sister Mermaid. Amy said with a look of surprise. She didn't care that she was drenched in water. It seems that she's really fine. Meg nodded too. Although this mermaid hadn't woken up completely, she was still blowing bubbles in the bathtub like a fish. She even had a smile on her lips. She didn't look like she was in any trouble. Meg took a dry towel and wiped the salt water off Amy's face, then wrung out a wet towel and wiped it again. He looked at the mermaid lying in the bathtub and was a little worried. How should she take a bath tonight? Father, I also want to swim in the bathtub like Big Sister Mermaid and breathe in the water, Amy said as she looked at Meg expectantly. That won't do. Meg is a human and needs to breathe air. She can't breathe underwater. Meg shook his head. Then why can Big Sister Mermaid? Amy looked at the bubbling mermaid with some confusion. Because she's a mermaid, so she can breathe in the water like a fish, but at the same time, she has lost the ability to breathe and live on land. This is fair, Meg said with a smile. Okay. Amy nodded thoughtfully and held Meg's hand. Then I'd better live on land, because that's the only way I can accompany Father. Then let's wash up and get ready to sleep. Looking at her, she probably won't wake up for a while. Meg smiled and touched Amy's head, then gave Amy a bath. He simply wiped his body with a towel outside and considered it a bath. Father, does Big Sister Mermaid live in the sea? Don't only fish live in the sea? Why can she live in the sea? Amy asked curiously as she lay on the small bed. Maybe they're a very special existence. Meg smiled. In the history of the Norland continent, there were very few records about sirens. At least in the last 1,000 years, there were almost no records about mermaids. He did not know if her existence was accidental, or mermaids had always existed somewhere in the deep sea. Meg was more inclined to the latter because according to the test results of the omniscient door, this mermaid should have the power of an eighth tier in the deep sea. A hybrid species that appeared by chance obviously would not have to have such power to come to life. To a certain extent. To a degree. Whether it was the beautiful and elegant fishtail, or the exquisite appearance and perfect figure, they all showed the perfection of evolution, to be. Okay. Amy's eyes lit up, and she nodded her little head. At the very, very deep bottom of the sea, there was a majestic castle where 6 mermaid princesses lived. They were all very beautiful, especially the youngest princess. She had long blonde hair, and was prettier than her elder sisters. She loved to listen to her elder sisters talk about the many interesting things on the sea. Hence, the little princess always wanted to go to the sea one day to take a look. She waited and waited, and on the little princess's 15th birthday, Meg's voice rose and fell as he told the story of the mermaids. It was a little low. Amy listened very carefully. She heard how happy the little mermaid was when she saw the prince, how worried she was when she drank the witch's potion when she saw the prince again, and how sad the little mermaid was because she could not speak when the prince wanted to marry another girl. At dawn, the mermaid princess said to herself on the deck, "Prince, goodbye." Then, the mermaid princess's body slowly turned into many colorful bubbles. Meg ended the story in a low voice. "Humph, the little mermaid is so pitiful. Men are all pig-trotters." Amy sniffed and said sadly. Meg smiled and shook his head. When his daughter got angry, she would even scold him. Then, "Father, did Sister Mermaid come to the restaurant to see you? So she has legs, but she can't speak." Amy looked at Meg with a scrutinizing expression. "Do you have a castle? Did you fall from a ship into the water before? Were you rescued later? Then you met my mother. That must be it. You thought that mother was the one who saved you, so you married her. Then, Sister Mermaid drank the witch's potion and came here to look for you." Amy sighed and said with pity, "It's so pitiful. Anyone who heard it would be sad, and anyone who saw it would cry. Is there such a thing?" Meg's face was full of question marks. Amy's series of attacks almost made him believe that he had really let down the mermaid and was a pig-trotter. But if this happened when he fell into the water in his previous life, then the story would not have been written like this. Although he was not a prince, he still had a castle by the sea, raising a little mermaid who could spread her legs and living a shameless life. Stop, there was a story here. However, there were a few parts of Amy's words that made Meg curious. When she first appeared, the mermaid did indeed have legs, and when they first met, she could not say a complete sentence, not even a complete word. Why did this mermaid leave the sea and come here? This was indeed a question worth investigating. All right, it's time for us to sleep. We still have school tomorrow. If you have any questions, you can ask that big sister mermaid tomorrow. Meg stroked Amy's hair with a smile. Okay. Amy sat up, hugged Meg's neck, and kissed him on the cheek. She smiled and said, "Good night, Father." "Good night, Amy." Meg also kissed Amy on the forehead, tucked her in, and turned off the lights. That night, Meg had a dream. In the dream, when he fell into the water and was about to suffocate, he vaguely saw a mermaid swimming towards him. With a beautiful tail and a moving body, she swam nimbly in the water like a real fish and quickly came to his side. Then, Meg saw 2 words on her face, "System." This was really a terrible nightmare. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, wonderful book mobile version website, .com. Chapter 10:20. Gina had a very, very long dream. She walked for a very, very long time in the boundless desert. The fireball hanging high in the sky made her breathless, and the water in her body was gradually squeezed dry. However, she couldn't find a water skin on her. When she felt that she was about to die, she was hugged by a pair of big, warm hands from behind. She saw that person's face in a daze. It was a handsome man. He was different from the merfolk men because he had a pair of long, straight legs. What an enviable pair of long legs. In order to obtain such a pair of legs, she didn't know how much suffering she had gone through before she was barely able to do it. But it had grown on his body just like that. Have I finally found the chosen one? Gina was elated. She wanted to open her mouth to speak, but her throat felt like it was on fire, and she couldn't open her mouth. Then, that man stuck an unknown object into her mouth, and a disgusting liquid flowed into her mouth. She couldn't help but vomit. At that moment, she felt like she was going to suffocate to death. This chosen one is a bad guy. That was the only thought in her mind before she lost consciousness. Then, she lost consciousness completely. Gina thought she was dead. She had found the chosen one, but she had died in his arms before she could say a word. Because she had been away from the ocean for too long, and she had even lost the most important thing, the seawater. There was no seawater on the land, and even the chosen one could not save her, not to mention that the chosen one was a bad guy. However, after some time, she suddenly felt her body become warm and comfortable all of a sudden. It was as if she had returned to the ocean. The comfortable water nourished her body, and her stiff body gradually regained some feeling. The fatigue from the past few days quickly overwhelmed her, and she fell into a deeper sleep. It was as if she was sleeping in her own home. She slept very comfortably. Am I already dead? After an unknown amount of time, Gina slowly opened her eyes. All she could see was a vast expanse of whiteness. She felt as though she was in a closed coffin. Even turning her body was a difficult task. Only the nobles of Lantis would be buried in crystal coffins. This was a very ancient tradition. With her status, she could indeed use a coffin after her death. But didn't I see the chosen one during the third teleportation? Could it be that it was just a dream? My last teleportation actually brought me back to the endless sea. However, even though I didn't complete the mission, the high priest shouldn't have buried me alive, right? Gina's mind was filled with question marks. She was familiar with the smell of the seawater around her. Apart from being particularly clean, it was almost no different from the seawater of the endless sea. It was absolutely impossible for seawater to exist on land, because the water on land was like poison to the mermaid clan. Shoo! At this moment, a leisurely whistle was heard, accompanied by the sound of water. What's that sound? Gina was delighted. She wasn't dead yet, so how could she be buried alive in a coffin? Even though she had received the best education since she was young, she would rather be executed than die slowly in such an enclosed place. That would be better than such torture. Her desire to live made her try to do something, for example, struggle. Splash! The big fishtail created a splash of water, and landed heavily with a loud thud. It was exceptionally crisp. What the hell? Meg, who had just woken up and was standing in front of the toilet bowl to release the pressure in his bladder, was shocked. His hands trembled, and he almost jumped up. The bathroom was dry and wet, and separated from each other. However, this sound wasn't blocked out. This sound made Meg jolt awake. He was still a little groggy at first, but he was completely awake now. He quickly zipped up his pants, looked at his hands unhappily, and quickly turned on the tap to rinse his hands. He looked into the bathroom with uncertainty. He had a nightmare last night, and was still a little groggy when he woke up in the morning. He almost forgot that he had a mermaid in the bathtub. Judging from the commotion, she was most likely awake now. However, he didn't know what was wrong with her to make such a big commotion. "Father, what are you and Big Sister Mermaid doing in there? Why is there such a loud noise?" Amy knocked on the door from outside. "I'm just washing my face, but she seems to be awake." Meg quickly opened the door and said to Amy. Luckily, he hadn't gone in yet. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to explain himself even if he had 100 mouths. "But, your face is dry." Amy pointed at Meg's cheek. "I just started washing my hands." Meg's hands trembled. He didn't expect the little one to be so observant. When Gina heard the noise outside, she suddenly quieted down. She listened carefully, but she couldn't understand the conversation between the two people outside at all. She couldn't help but think anxiously, who are they? Why can't I understand what they're saying at all? Could it be that I didn't return to the endless ocean, but was transported to another sea? Are there other mermaids and mermaids there? Or are there other races living under the sea? Amy was just asking casually. She walked in curiously and said, "Is Big Sister Mermaid really awake? Then let's go and see her. She must be uncomfortable sleeping alone in the bathtub. Be careful. She just woke up. I'm afraid she doesn't know the current situation and might cause misunderstandings." Meg quickly walked forward and shielded Amy behind him. Then, he gently pushed open the isolation door of the bathroom. In the quiet bathroom, a mermaid was lying face down in the bathtub, motionless. If it weren't for the water stains on the ground and the rippling water surface in the bathtub, it wouldn't have looked any different from last night. Gina nervously listened to the commotion outside. She could feel two figures approaching, but she was trapped here. The water was too shallow, and she was restricted everywhere. She couldn't even stretch her hands out. She didn't know if the people outside were hostile toward her. However, she had already started to activate her magic. If there was danger, she had to protect herself immediately. "Big Sister Mermaid, are you awake? I'm Amy. Next to me is my father. We saved you. We don't have any hostility toward you," Amy said softly as she stood at the bathroom door. This voice sounds so cute, like a little girl. But what is she talking about? There doesn't seem to be any hostility. But I don't understand what they're saying. Can they understand me? Gina anxiously swung her tail and said, "Let me out. I'm not dead yet. I can still be saved." Chapter 10:21. Meg held Amy's hand and stood at the entrance of the bathroom. He was speechless as he looked at the mermaid who was struggling like a salted fish in the bathtub, splashing water everywhere. Wasn't mermaids the symbol of elegance? Why did this beautiful mermaid look like a salted fish in a frying pan when she was struggling with her face down? Moreover, she was making a series of gibberish sounds. Her voice was very crisp and pleasant, but Meg, who was proficient in 2 languages, couldn't understand a single word. It sounded a little like Russian, but he was sure that he couldn't understand it at all. Meow, ugly duckling stuck its head in from beside their feet. It looked at the big tail that was sticking out of the bathtub with glowing eyes as though it was looking at its breakfast. "Father, what is Big Sister Mermaid saying?" Amy looked at Meg in confusion. "I don't understand either." Meg shook his head. He observed the mermaid who still couldn't turn over, and said hesitantly, "Maybe she wants to turn over. Then let's help her." "She looks very anxious," Amy said with pity. Gina was indeed very anxious. Although this coffin that restrained her could completely contain her, and there was still room for her to move around on both sides. To her who lived in the vast ocean, being trapped in such a small place and possibly being trapped until she died was something completely unacceptable. However, she couldn't understand what the people outside were saying, and most of the people outside couldn't understand what she was saying either. She was the Princess of Lantish, and she might actually starve to death here because of a language barrier. This was so aggrieved that she wanted to cry. Once she thought about it, her tears fell uncontrollably like pearls. Moreover, the tears had already fallen, and they really became blue teardrop-shaped pearls that slowly fell to the bottom of the bathtub. Woo-woo, pitiful cries came from the bathtub. That mermaid seemed to have given up struggling, and just lay at the bottom of the bathtub and cried. Big Sister Mermaid, you can't even turn over. Why do you have to cry so pitifully? Amy walked over to the bathtub and stood on her tiptoes to look into the bathtub. She was a little curious. Maybe he was accidentally teleported here like Barbara. Is it related to the Moon Nation? Meg frowned as he thought about it. The teleportation array under the restaurant led to an unknown number of places, and this was already the second guest. Miss Mermaid, is it convenient for you to turn around and talk? Meg walked to the side of the bathtub and asked the mermaid who was crying in the bathtub. Although I don't understand what he's saying, the voice sounds so gentle. It seems to be coming from above. Could that person be above? Gina heard the sound and slowly turned her head to look up. However, she could only turn her neck 90 degrees at most. She still could not see anything above her. What are you looking at? Isn't there a cover above? Whoa. Gina felt even more wronged, and suddenly lost the motivation to turn around. Although she really wanted to see what the man with the gentle voice looked like, she might be sealed here forever. Am I really that lazy? Meg reached into the bathtub helplessly and gently grabbed one of the mermaid's shoulders. Then, he flipped her over so that her face was facing up. Gina only felt a warm and strong hand grabbing her shoulder. She turned around as the world spun. Empty. There's no cover. Gina blinked and was a little confused. This was not the bottom of the sea. There was only air outside the area where she was lying. Could she still be on land? But why would there be such a small ocean on land? White bottom of the sea, white shore. How could such a place exist? The bright lights and the two people, one big and one small, came into her sight. After being confused for a while, Gina calmed herself down and noticed the two figures standing at the side. Her gaze landed on the little girl lying on the white shore. What a cute little girl. Gina's eyes lit up. Her big blue eyes were blinking, and a strand of hair on her silver hair was sticking up. She looked even more adorable, especially her pair of crystal-clear pointy ears. Could this be the kind elf that the high priest had mentioned before? Hello, Big Sister Mermaid. Amy waved her little hand at Gina. She liked pretty big sisters, even though she might not be able to understand what they were saying. Although Gina couldn't understand what the little girl was saying, she could feel her kindness. Therefore, she smiled and nodded at Amy. Then, her gaze landed on the figure at the side, and her gaze froze. After being stunned for 3 seconds, she sat up from the bathtub and grabbed Meg's hand. She said excitedly, "The chosen one. I finally found you. I had such a hard time looking for you." Big Sister Mermaid seems to really know Father. Could it be that she really saved Father? Did she drink the witch's potion in order to see her father again? Should I tell Big Sister Irina about this? Amy murmured thoughtfully as she looked at Gina, who was holding Meg's hand tightly with an uncontrollable expression, with a scrutinizing look. Miss, did you get the wrong person?" Meg was also a little confused. Although he couldn't understand what she was saying, she seemed to know him from her expression, and there was a high probability that she was looking for him. However, there was no memory of mermaids in his and Alex's memories. Suddenly leaving the water and being exposed to the air, Gina's breathing began to quicken. However, looking at the chosen one that she had gone through so much to find, how could she bear to let go? She was afraid that if she let go, she would wake up from this dream. Father, it wasn't easy for Big Sister Mermaid to find you. How can you be so heartless as to pretend that you don't know her? She drank the witch's potion in order to see you again. She couldn't even speak. How can you bear to let go of her just like that? Amy said to Gina with a pitiful look. Am I really such a scumbag? Meg couldn't help but ask himself at this moment. Meow. Right at this moment, Ugly Duckling also stuck its head out of the bathtub and meowed. Gina glanced at it instinctively, and her face turned pale instantly. She bent her fishtail and jumped out of the bathtub, hitting the ceiling with a bang. Then, she fell back into the bathtub with a clang. She was like a frightened mouse that buried its head under the fishtail and shivered in the corner. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com, wonderful book mobile version website, .com. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure. Oh.